Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 381. Stone Chewer. The damage even rivaled his draconic blade. It was a shame that a pickaxe was a rather wieldy tool that lacked any dedicated attack skills. Still, with these kinds of enchantments, nobody would want to be struck by it. When he checked the skill, to see what the synergy had caused, he found a few changes. Active skill, piercing strike, no cost, cooldown, 30 seconds. Ignore the target's armor and deal 350% true damage to the target. The cooldown had lowered because of the strengthened soul, but the damage effect had absorbed the effects of the pierce enchantment that should have increased the power of stabs and piercing strikes by 150%. Seth didn't know whether this was good or bad. If this was a weapon like a spear, he personally might have preferred to keep increased attack for every attack. As for its effects on mining, Seth quickly became aware when he tried it on the corpse of the stone giant in the dismantling hall. He activated piercing strike and swung at the dead Chrysopra's corpse. The pick penetrated the material like it was jelly and Seth felt almost no resistance. In a radius of 40 centimeters around the gouge of the attack, the outer shell of the giant crumbled into a coarse granulate. Seth stared at the 80 centimeters wide gouge in shock. It felt like using a shaper tool in a 3D program. He couldn't stop the corners of his mouth from rising. But it did not end there. Boom! When he tried armor break, a part of similar size outright exploded in his face with chunks and pebbles of extremely hard rock flying through the dismantling hall. In addition to these skills, the normal use of the pickaxe was also a vast improvement to his previous one. Enthusiastically, Seth started exploring the anatomy of the stone giant by grinding its body to dust and rubble. Despite not being an ore, Seth meticulously collected these stones, too. Something had changed since the class advancement. His blacksmith's eyes had changed. Before, Seth was unable to appraise the material of the stone giant's skin, but now, when he picked up the stones and rubble, he was able to appraise it just fine. Stone hide, crafting material, rare. The incredibly hard hide of a stone giant. It has a high resistance to physical and magical influence. Despite its hardness rivaling obsidian, it is not nearly as brittle. The corpses of stone giants who died a natural death have often become the foundation for the strongest fortifications in history. The description made pretty clear why Seth was unable to appraise this before. It was a material meant for masonry and less for blacksmithing. Especially the first sentence made it quite clear. Since this stone was highly resistant to magical influence, it made blacksmiths unable to forge it by using energy circulation. Like a gem, this could only be cut or sculpted. Past the hard hide, came a layer of softer stone Seth was once again unable to appraise. What did this mean? Shouldn't a mason or sculptor be able to appraise all kinds of minerals? That was unless blacksmith's eyes were not simply augmented with the range of a mason job. Seth had enough time to think about it as he worked on the gigantic corpse. If he was suddenly able to appraise one stone, but not the other, it meant that it had to do with his new skills. The most probable suspect was golem artisan. Thinking of golems, it would make sense that a material like stone hide was recognized as a material. This meant the stone that made up the flesh of the giant was not useful for golem creation. Still, Seth meticulously stored these stones away, too. They weren't worthless, only because he couldn't immediately see the worth. Seth soon fell into a routine, where he worked without much thought. It was oddly satisfying to grind away the stone with ease. Like a machine, he kept cutting away at the giant until he finally reached the bones. The pickaxe almost slipped out of his hands in surprise when he revealed the bone. Like a massive vein, the bones were made up of heavy wugram ore and the marrow was pure wugram. Seth remembered the material from his match with Cerberus. Was this where wugram came from? No wonder he had been unable to find it in the auction house. Heavy wugram ore, crafting material, rare. A very rare mineral that is only sparsely found in nature. A natural compound of wugram. This ore can be refined to heavy wugram. Wugram, crafting material, epic. A metal that can normally not be found in nature. A very dense metal with high magic and earth affinity that can easily enter chemical compounds and alloys with other materials of the same element. Seth knew of heavy wugram, but the latter was his first encounter with pure wugram. He decided to ask Al later whether she knew any more about this. Although he was a little clueless about the wugram, just the amount of epic metal cast a smile on his face. Especially heavy wugram was a material Seth greeted with open arms. With this and the adamantium, he could finally make a worthy armor for Tekker, not to mention the possibilities for golems. This was not the end. Aside from the bones, Seth found thin veins of fey metal like nerves, thick mithril ore strands that probably acted as tendons, and the brain made of arcane gold ore, that he had already seen before. There were also its teeth, that were brick-shaped rocks, for chewing other rocks and minerals. He was bathed in sweat and tired when the fatigue finally caught up. Not even half of the giant's body was mined yet, but Seth's inventory was already filled to the brim with materials. Even if he refined down all the ores, it was too much to keep it all in his inventory. The big treasury in his private quarters would finally see some proper use. Seth put the other half of the body back in his inventory and returned to his quarters to get some sleep. Seeing Mina already sleeping in their bed made him smile wryly. She had been at the dungeons, and he had not known she had already returned. He decided to take a break tomorrow and spend time with her and relax. What was the use behind all the work, if he couldn't enjoy the important things in life? He washed up, changed, and snuggled up to her before falling asleep. And he did exactly that. In the end, it became a few days of break. Most of it he spent with Mina and Finn. He also went to look after Pip to see if she was doing well. The girl and her friends were getting along well with Otto, the pharmacist. Drosy and his people were also slowly recovering from their experiences in beta. Although they were physically okay, their morale had gotten a few cracks and breaks. As an old coot, Drosy was not easy to demotivate, but it was different for the younger people. The Tija were known as dimensional nomads, but they would also sometimes choose to settle down if they found a good place. Younger generations would then set off again from there. Usually, they would be traveling for a few decades before settling down, but now many insisted on staying with Mina's march. While Drosy would have liked to insist on traveling like they used to, he also understood the younglings. Making their women and children travel in this world was irresponsible if there was a safe place for them to stay. With many of the young couples recently expecting offspring, they would stay at Mina's Mar for quite a while. Drosy would always feel embarrassed for freeloading and apologize to Seth whenever the topic came up. "Stop apologizing already, Drosy. There is no need to hurry. Take all the time you need," he kept reassuring the old cat. He shared his ideas for the future with Drosy and told him that it would take a while to get to that point, anyway. Somehow, knowing there was a lot of work waiting in the future, helped calm the old cat's conscience. It was different for Seth, who felt slightly overwhelmed when he thought of all the things that waited in the future. He looked forward to it, but it also felt tiresome. Chapter 382. New Things. In the following weeks, the news of Beta became public within Delta and Epsilon, with the flow of refugees from the district growing. The atmosphere of Delta became heavy in this time, and a few guilds followed Minas Mar's example to help in the evacuation. Voices that demanded for the districts to step in to do more than just war relief became loud. There were many reasons, disclosed or undisclosed, why the leaderships did not move in this direction. The society that had just started to recover, thinking that there might be a chance to return to a peaceful time at least similar to the past. It hit Delta especially hard. Now, the new nature of their world, which had been kept at the borders of their district for the most part, had moved back into the consciousness of the people. What if someday there would open a portal beside Delta and they would be invaded? The Empire had been there to deal with the demons, but what about next time? The public that had pushed these changes to the back of their minds and overlooked them for their own convenience became aware of the perpetual danger of the world around them. In the meantime, Seth tried to strike a good work-life balance. With more people trying to gain strength in fear of the future, the blacksmith's business was booming. Seth left most of the production for the shop to Cerberus and the dwarves, while he worked on his own experiments and equipment for himself and the members. However, at this time, Seth made sure to not hole up in the workshop for too long at a time and enjoy the company of Mina and his friends. He even started visiting the Bard's College again, to learn different instruments and find what fits him best. The music teacher was also a great help in improving his singing skill. The only thing he neglected at this time was his level. He did not visit any dungeons for the time being. The first thing he did was to update his own equipment. The materials of Chrysoprase, the stone giant, had given him new options, compared to before. Originally, he planned to use Fey steel for his new jewelry. But after mining the giant and gaining Wugram, he found it the vastly superior material for his needs. Following its high affinity with the earth element, Wugram had a high acceptance for other metals. This meant that Wugram was one of the few magic metals that allowed for the formation of alloys or pattern layering. Thanks to this, Seth was able to create an alloy using celestial bronze and Wugram, that would strengthen both elements and keep the immunity to fire damage. Otherwise, there would have been a possibility to damage his own items, if he went overboard with fire. Seth had gotten 3 gems called Deep Topaz from the auction house. They had a great earth affinity and were perfect for accessories. He decided to only use one of the topazes on a ring and use the other 2 gems for the pair of earrings. The reason for this change was what he had looted from the giant's chest. Its energy core, the core of chrysoprase, was the perfect nucleus for a magician's staff, improving the power of the earth element greatly. He started with the ring since he had the most experience with rings and pendants. He kept the simple style with the embedded stone. This time, Seth did not use some ballad he had learned at the college. The elements of the ring reminded him of his Song of Fire and Earth. Using songwriting, he perfected the song with a rare rating. He did not call upon a specific demon and had no one specific in mind. Using Orpheus' voice and voice of Seth, the song was transmitted into the ether through channeling. Whatever demon took a liking to it, could grant its power. A demon called Talamtine answered the song and granted its power to the ring. For the enchantment, Seth chose something he could finally use after becoming a craftsman. Breath was a high-level enchantment that could allow one to breathe despite the lack of oxygen. It was a good enchantment for mining or underwater levels. Seth had used all his uncommon big souls from the glow people he had left on the equipment for his companions. This was why he extracted the soul from the old ring. After repairing it, he engraved it with the divine enchantment Blessing of Mnemosyne. He had not slacked and polished his knowledge. Mnemosyne was the goddess of memory and one of the rivers of the underworld. Hers was one of the enchantments that were unlocked with enchantment, craftsman, leave 3. Since he would need to learn spells from now on, he thought it was a good idea to get a buff for his memory. Once again, he could feel the presence of someone watching him as he engraved the abstract sigil. As the daughter of Gaia, the land herself, the presence seemed pleased with the ring, fully geared for the earth attribute. Soon he finished the engraving and a fine net of vines spread out to cover the soul ring. All that was left, was infusing it into the ring, and it was finished. Earth's memory. Unique. Durability, 1200. One item is immune to fire damage. 2 plus 30% earth affinity. 3 plus 35% to the effect of all earth attribute magic. 4 plus 10% to the effect of all fire attribute magic. 5 plus 20% additional curse damage to fire and earth attribute skills. 6 casting time is reduced by 25%. 7 plus 30% mana regeneration. 8 passive skill, memorize. 9 active skill, the land remembers. 10 active skill, telepathy. 11 passive skill, breath, a simple looking ring hiding a huge secret made by craftsman Smith in his endeavor to remember the world. A divine existence has lent a hand in the creation of this item. Once rumors of the ring's power spread or it plays a role in the user's ascent to a legend, the item might become legendary. The ring brought him to 10% proficiency of leave 1 in goldsmith, craftsman. The skills that came with the blessing were more special than Seth had expected. Memorize gave him the ability of a selective, perfect memory. He had used almost 20 medium-sized souls to improve the power of this passive skill. It allowed him to perfectly remember up to 300 memories. Whereby memories were not exactly defined. But Seth decided the more the better. The land remembers allowed him to see what happened in a place in the past. With the power-up, he could look up to 3 hours into the recent past. What surprised him was that telepathy was added as a third option. This saved him a lot of headaches since telepathy was a very complex enchantment and was easy to fail. He had wanted this skill for some time now. But at over 300 gold, it was too expensive to buy at the auction house. Seth was very satisfied with this ring. However, this was not the last ring he made for himself. The second ring Seth made had nothing to do with combat. For this ring, he brought out one of a few brass ingots he had stored away a long time ago. It was one of the ingots he judged successful after his experiments with volatile zinc. Lucky brass, unique. Be favored by fortune. Was all the description said, but it was more than enough. What exactly did the luck stat mean in the context of the system? Seth still was not too sure about all implications, but he knew one thing. After he had made this brass ingot back then, the later brass ingots and even the rings from bones of Seth Cerberus had been making in the background, tended to have better options. If his luck affected the options of bones of Seth, then it was worth having a ring, dedicating for just this attribute. He used the lucky brass and the fortune glass, he had bought from Drosy all that time ago, to make a ring. He further strengthened the ring with a ballad praising Asmodeus, the demon of gambling. Interestingly enough, the price one had to pay for Asmodeus's blessing was money or precious things. Seth liked this ballad because it had mentioned in the description that items could be used for the exchange. Seth paid the demon with 10 epic rings to gain a strong effect. There were no enchantments that could improve chance, so Seth engraved it with feather fall, so he would not need to fear death from falling in the future. Lucky trinket. Unique. 1 plus 50 luck. 2 wearer is slightly favored by fortune. 3 feather fall, 50 mana per minute. A simple looking ring with a very rare effect made by the hands of craftsman Smith, who attempts to improve his chances. Seth had not added a soul to the ring, because he was unconvinced with his current options. His gut told him that it was better to wait than to hastily finish the ring. Although there was no visible change to an item that had its soul extracted, Seth could not ignore the feeling that it did matter. Aside from his 2 new rings, Seth made a new pair of earrings using the 2 deep topaz gems left. These earrings were a lot more covered than his dragon glass earrings from before. They were also a lot more powerful. He used the soul he extracted from his previous set and his second dragon glass ring for the earrings, which made them a pair, but not a set item. Like with the rings, he added some of the useful enchantments he had unlocked with the craftsman tier. He enchanted the left earring with the advanced enchantment of life detection. As for the right, he inscribed a poem on the soul before he infused it. Terra Topaz Earring, R. Relic. Durability, 1200. 1 item is immune to fire damage. 2 plus 30% earth affinity. 3 plus 35% to the effect of all earth attribute magic. 4 plus 10% to the effect of all fire attribute magic. 5 plus 20% additional curse damage to fire and earth attribute skills. 6 casting time is reduced by 25%. 7 plus 30% mana regeneration. 8 passive skill, perfect pitch. 9 plus 50 willpower. 10 plus 50 intelligence. A simple looking earring made by craftsman Smith in his endeavor to get closer with nature. Perfect pitch was a passive skill that improved his hearing, especially for singing and playing music. Life detection, on the other hand, could help him see enemies in a radius of 20 m, even through walls. Now, he would just need to make sure not to cover himself in flames while wearing his lucky trinket, because it was not immune to fire. Chapter 383. Golem Golem Golem. Having dealt with his own equipment, Seth also spent some time revising the equipment of his friends. Some of the items he had made of the stronghold seemed lacking at this point. Especially after getting his hands on a multitude of high-grade materials, he would have felt bad if he did not improve those that seemed lacking. Only then did he dive into the creation and modification of vessels. Al-Salzar became a rare sight at Mina's march. She was either going around the city or locked up in her own laboratory. Seth left her to her own devices. It was just a shame that he could not get her advice whenever he needed it anymore. This left him on his own with his skills and knowledge, to find a way to adjust her design to make it usable for ordinary souls. On top of that were the techniques of golem artisan he tended to explore further. Telepathy, he had gained with his new ring, was a great help for this, since he could finally communicate with the ego souls and gain their consent for the experiments. After his experience with the skeleton key and the raging monkey souls, he had realized the problem with ego items. Back then on the battlefield, he had harvested the souls of 25 people, 10 of which had kept their ego. Of those he couldn't help back then, they had consented to get a chance to survive. Now that he could finally communicate with them and explain the situation, he had the consent of 5 to be used for the experiments. Seth saw the importance of being transparent with them, so they would be willing to work for him once he managed to build vessels for them. The soul that completely refused to communicate with him was the pseudo-swamp dragon. He knew that the soul had an ego, but his attempt for communication was left unanswered. For his experiment, Seth had long since decided to start from the blueprints of the great sorceress. The approach of golem artisan called for very strong souls and squandered much of this power in the creation of a body. This was why Seth wanted to start off of Al's efficient design and first adapt it to ordinary souls. Once he felt confident in his understanding of the subject, he wanted to increase the scale and incorporate golem artisan into the process. However, things never were as easy as they looked on paper. During his work, he quickly realized that he would not go as he wanted. Al-Salzar was special, similar to Evie since she had originally gone through the ritual to become a lich. A lich was attuned to having its soul and body split. With her power, knowledge, and special conditions, she was able to work around some flaws, that came with the accidental application of Golem Artisan. When it came to normal souls, Seth needed to transform them first to even make them eligible for the process. Otherwise, they would be unable to operate the vessel from within the nucleus. Having no other choice, Seth started off practicing Golem Artisan. The skill was a mix of what Seth had been doing to enchant souls and the technology usually used on automatons and golems. As he studied the blueprints, Seth understood that the previous spirit blacksmith had also come across the property that allowed an infused soul to generate a body, as long as there was enough power and materials supplied. Unlike Seth, the previous holder must have had a high attainment in the technology of automatons or golems. Which is to be expected, to be able to create a skill like Golem Artisan. Level 1 of the skill used a spell array to engrave a soul with a rudimentary set of golem controls that helped it generate a body and listen to commands of the maker. The obvious advantage to a regular golem was that it did not need a physical power core. In theory, unless the golem was blasted to the point that the soul disintegrated, it would not die and simply regenerate its body. In this case, it was even more powerful than Al's design, since she could be quite easily killed, as long as her core was destroyed. In the end, she had kept the weakness of a lich in her original design. The drawback was the abysmal power consumption. Seth tested it a generic medium-sized soul and the result was an earth golem the size of a doll. Its body was made up of hardened earth and its stature was stocky and a little chubby. It was actually really cute. He made another one and gifted them to Finn and Mina. He was sure they could appreciate them. And he soon regretted giving one to Finn. The fairy brute had immediately bragged about the little guy to the children in the tower, and Seth was stuck with making another 20. Spending 20 souls on making toys was a lot better than facing the tearful eyes of a group of children and trying to explain why he did not want to make toys for them. In the end, he had no reason to regret it, since the skill leveled up thanks to the practice. With level 2 came more complex sets of orders and material choices, like stone. Seeing the limited options of orders for the golem, Seth immediately understood why having an ego soul could make things a lot easier. Before he continued his experiments, he prepared better materials. Since medium souls only did this much, Seth accepted his fate and started to go bigger. He wanted to see what they could do when he went a size bigger. He condensed most of the small souls as they had lesser uses than medium-sized ones. The result was 6 big common souls, which equaled roughly 600 small ones. With this method, he knew the approximate size of the souls he used. Going by Seth's experience, souls were judged as big with a mana reservoir of 1000 to 9999. This was a huge margin, and when it came to naturally collected souls, he could only roughly guess at which end of the spectrum they were. Knowing the exact size of the souls was important because the performance of the golems depended on it. Equipped with these, the experiments continued. First, Seth transformed a big soul using the setting for an earth golem. To test it, he had to move locations since there was not enough earth in his workshop. Before he left to test it outside, he made another big soul, this time to become a stone golem. Outside of Mina's Mar, Seth pulled his mantle tighter around himself and used a little pyromancy to heat himself up. The mountains had never been warm, but lately, the climate had gotten colder. Winter was coming. Placing the golem souls on the ground, he gave a command and they started taking shape. With the earth golem soul in the center, a vortex of loose earth started breaking through the snow cover and condensed around the soul. For the stone golem, loose rubble and small rocks started to tumble around and collected at the place where the soul had taken root. Compared to the medium soul, the outcome was vastly different. Befitting a 10 times bigger soul, the earth golem scratched a size of 4 m in height and 3 m in width. The stone golem on the other hand was a little shorter and slimmer, with roughly 3 m in height and around 2 m in width. They were however similar in appearance with wide shoulders and thick arms reaching all the way to the ground. These guys were far from cute, with their rough humanoid faces and uncanny proportions. These guys were definitely not weak, but when Seth thought of what kind of creatures dropped big souls, then the golems could not compare. One of them would be unable to compare to something like a Titanoboa from Deltan. But this was only when it came to overall strength. If one considered that these golems could keep regenerating and probably had a higher defense, it might come down to what opponent they met. Since they had some utility, it was not a total waste of resources. Feeling the icy wind and snow, Seth already had an idea what to test next. These golems were the most basic and coincided with the typical image one had when thinking of a golem from video games. He had chosen these because they had the smallest cost to maintain their body after formation. That was right, there were other variations, but unlike these earth element golems, they needed mana to maintain their form. However, seeing the mountains being naturally cold and getting colder in winter, it was perfect to test snow and ice golems, the variations of earth and stone from the water element. Seth didn't just wish to gain more proficiency for golem artisan. Understanding and comparing the different spell arrays was another step forward. His ultimate goal was to identify the parts of the spell array that allowed the souls to generate and bind to a golem body. If he succeeded, he might even be able to enable a normal soul to generate a body of flesh and blood around a vessel, as Al did. And if that didn't work, he would just have to keep raising golem artisan until it did work. Chapter 384. Though the souls keep rollin'. A little more than 2 weeks had passed since Seth returned from Beta. Positive news started arriving one after another. Things were set in motion. The relief forces of Y City had reached Beta District and managed to cooperate with the remaining guilds and soldiers of Beta. The evacuation was slowly gaining traction. There was also news of scattered refugees arriving in Y City. Simon, the chubby priest, brought another piece of news. Princess Lena and the rescue forces successfully reached Gamma District. It seemed that their journey had been a safe one and everyone was fine. They were now occupied with organizing themselves and preparing to escort the refugees from Gamma to Delta. Azul was happy to hear that the Chimeras had arrived in Gamma without any casualties. A lot of people would be crossing the mountains this winter. The evacuation would get into full swing soon and the princess was also preparing to climb the mountain range. Seth hoped they were properly prepared for the cold. After thinking about it for some time, he had a talk with Hone. With the help of the magic blacksmith, he designed something like a heating packet. The blacksmith had come up with a small token enchanted with a fire shield. Using his experience in enchanting and trying to adjust the spell arrays of the golems, he had reduced the upkeep cost of the shield in exchange for the shield's blocking power. By injecting a small amount of mana into the token, the user would be able to create a bubble of heat around them. By emphasizing the heat generation instead of the shield properties, he was able to cut down on the cost of the spell. Although Seth had felt quite smug about his idea, the dwarf burst his bubble. This was not a new idea and there existed many iterations of this across the Pathworks. Creating a magic device that could be used as a portable heat source was not that original of an idea. However, Seth's device was original since they used Puffle's ancient bronze as material. This gave the item another boost. After making a few prototypes in the shape of engraved coins, Hone suggested making a minting press instead of making them all by hand. Does that really work? Seth had doubts. Yes, it does. The dwarf explained that he had the fitting skill to make it work. As a blacksmith who specialized in enchanting and magic items, Hone had the skill to duplicate enchantments for mass production. Leaving it to Hone, they made a batch of 300 heat coins to start off and see if there was even a need for them. To deliver them to Gamma, he asked Drosy and the Tijat. It was the first task he asked of them and Drosy jumped onto it. It was a good first quest since the cat people could use the system church's teleport to travel to Gamma's starter village and back. There was no danger involved. 100 were meant for the Chimeras and another 100 would be gifted to the princess. They would send the remaining 100 to Y City. After discussing it with Hone and Puffles, they decided to sell the coins at the material price, if there was a demand for the evacuation efforts. Seth's own experiments also bore fruits. He tested the snow and ice golem with the big souls. The snow golem was hilariously big in size in exchange for having almost no substance. The ice golem on the other hand was about the size of the stone golem. For a change, he tried making a snow golem with a medium-sized soul. It ended up just being a head shorter than himself. With Seth being 1,90, the snow golem was of average height. Subconsciously, the blacksmith had wanted to try using big souls, because he thought that the outcome would at least be more usable than the minigals popular among the children and female members of Mina's March. Even Monique had approached Seth and asked for a minigal. She had tried to be casual about it, but the way she had avoided his eyes and blushed. Seth couldn't help but tease her before making one for her. After the initial tests, Seth was a little disappointed and saw no worth in wasting any more big souls for experiments. Instead, he returned to using medium-sized souls for further studies. Having seen the effect with a higher power input and different elements, he now had an idea of what to look out for. Soon he managed to manipulate their size and shape. Using a medium soul, he could now make a humanoid doll the size of a child. A few days later, he reached level 3 of Golem Artisan, which unlocked the spell arrays for golems made of ores and allowed him even more freedom in tweaking with the settings. Now that he could tweak the arrays to change their shape and material, he was able to make them take more efficient shapes. Seth used the remaining big souls to make a human-sized stone and ore golem. They resembled faceless mannequins. With its smaller, compact shape, the stone golem had become a lot quicker without losing any of its power. It was also able to operate on full power for much longer at a time before it had to stop and recover energy. But even with these modifications, the ore golem was a disappointment. It could barely move the speed of a relaxed person. Seth had used simple iron ore, some of what Puffles had left of the stone giant's armor. The iron ore golem gave him little hope that there would be any improvements without the use of a more powerful soul. Maybe there would be improvements if he used magical ores for this kind of golem? Fiddling with this technology, Seth's thoughts wandered to Cerberus. The golem had a chiseled body made of a material Seth could not fathom and showed no sign of tiring even when it worked in the smithy 24/7. Just what kind of soul would his predecessor have used for such a strong golem? This pondering ended, when Seth finally managed to find the parts of the spell he needed. Finding out how exactly to use it from here on was quickened, when Al visited him with her results on the books from Master Mountain. Seth showed her his own results and her comments and inspirations on the topic helped him find the right direction. He felt confident to give it a go. Of course, he gave it his own twist. Al had chosen the automaton approach. His predecessor had started off with golems. Seth learned from both of them, but he also had his own experiences. Seth had asked her to come by. Upon arrival, Al Salzar faced a 5m tall undead monkey skeleton. No, not an undead. It did not have the aura of one. A bone automaton? A skeleton golem? She was not sure what to call it. Inlays of thin mineral covered the bones of the skeleton. All of them, enchantment arrays of her design that made it possible for it to move. But in comparison, there was no central core to it. So this is your answer? It's true that a soul has the highest affinity with its previous body, or one similar to it. That's the idea. But I'm not a necromancer. Although I make them, I don't enjoy looking at them. The sorceress didn't really listen to him. She stared into the monkey's fiery blue eyes and suddenly moved as if to deliver a punch. The skeleton shrunk back in a defensive posture, awaiting a strike that never came. Something's not right. This isn't just a golem. This thing is sentient, she exclaimed. Ah, yes. Stuff happened. Seth explained a little embarrassed. Of course, before he managed to create this prototype there were a few failures. For this kind of golem, he had to not just assemble the skeleton and inlay it with the different enchantments. He had to forge the soul into a recreation of the whole skeleton before using Golem Artisan to convert it into a golem soul. In this process, his spirit forging had finally become Level 7. This came with a useful new perk. Seth was now able to refine souls through forging, which gave it a chance to create blank ego souls. Even if it did not gain an ego, depending on the soul it could generate an animalistic sentience that was able to gradually learn and take orders. This was why the monkey had instinctive reactions to attacks, for example. Even inherent combat and movement patterns. But I did not intend to brag when I asked you to come. I wanted to talk about a way to integrate an additional power source. It seems quite nimble and powerful. Why would you need more power? More power is always better. But it's not the only reason. I don't enjoy staring at a naked skeleton all the time. I'm not a necromancer. How about letting them grow skin or a shell of earth, like those other golems? A generically generated shell would defeat the purpose of using the skeleton. I wish to add armor to it. I see, let me take a closer look. Chapter 385. Keep them golems growin'. An afternoon later they had come up with a way to integrate either magic crystals or monster cores into the golem as additional power sources. It made sense to use the power cores of the monster themselves, but it was not possible for some. The magic crystals or magic nuclei used for staffs were a good substitute for those cases. Using Al's advice, Seth went ahead and created the second prototype. This monkey had the beast core, of one of the big monkeys, as an additional power source. Having the soul linked to a monster core and increasing the mana pool this way was almost the same as it worked for living beasts. Using the beast core, its bearer could naturally absorb and store mana from the surrounding. With this golem was no longer dependent on just the mana of the soul. Maybe Cerberus also had a very powerful core, explaining its huge might? Although the core was not a major weakness, like on a traditional golem, Seth gave it a thick shell of reinforced magic steel, making it the best armor part of the golem, but not the only one. As the blacksmith had mentioned, he did not share a necromancer's sentiment. A naked skeleton was not pleasing to his eyes. Sure, it looked cool, with all the complex inlays covering the bones, but he was a blacksmith. Ultimately, armor looked better. As such, the huge skeleton was covered in a huge plate armor made from the monkey's own reinforced leather. The armor covered most of the body and was thoroughly fixed to the bones. This way, the huge monkey skeleton had turned into an imposing giant monkey knight. It was literally called that, when Seth used blacksmith's eyes on the golem. Monkey Knight Leave 45. Trait, Unlimited Stamina. Race, Monkey Golem. Age 0. Affiliation, Myanmar. Durability, 1000/1000. Mana, 1900. Strength 360. Dexterity 140. Agility, 270. Intelligence. Willpower. Endurance, 500. Personality. Defense. Physical, 11,370. Magical, 4,600. Poison immunity. Mental immunity. Status anomaly resistance, 25%. Magic resistance 50%. Despite looking like a knight, its sentience still resembled that of a monkey, and it would not use a weapon. Instead, the monkey fists were reinforced with gauntlets for dealing devastating punches. Seth linked the soul to the leather armor, which turned the epic armor into a part of its body. This meant it could regenerate with the monkey's mana. Seth went easy on the OR armor's enchantments since he needed to keep the power output in mind. As such, he mostly added simple enchantments like additional strength and agility. He also added the feather effect, which could lighten the weight of an item. When he finished the prototype of the Monkey Knight, Golem Artisan became Leave 4 and Engineer became Leave 2. Of his other skills, Enchantment profited the most from his experiments and closed in on Craftsman level 4. The only thing that wondered him a little, was that he did not get a notification about creating something like artificial life, ever since he finished Al's body. Despite the fact that these monkeys Knight already possessed basic sentience, they were still called golems. Previously, the system could not tabulate the achievements, because he had used the divine metal for Al's frame. What was needed for it to count as artificial life? Was it to create an individual with sapience or a fleshly body? Maybe it was both. Maybe there was more to it. In the end, the system said he was the first on Earth. Then what was about Zen biologies? Didn't they do a lot of shenanigans that could count to creating artificial life? What was the difference between him and them? The souls. It had taken him a moment before he realized that his talent should be quite rare. Taking a dead soul and literally reviving it. Modern science could grow a body and magic could probably find ways to have a soul possess or inhabit it. But how many people were there that could grant a true rebirth? His waters of Styx, that could truly bind a soul to a body. There couldn't be too many people that had something comparable. This meant, ultimately, he would have to succeed in making something like Al again. A living body, with an ego. And a soul, baptized by his waters of Styx. Monkey 2 was a big step for him personally, but Seth had barely made progress if his ultimate goal was replicating Al Salzar's case. He was just beginning to catch up with his predecessor's skills, and Seth didn't know whether the predecessor ever did something like this. This wasn't all. A living, breathing body was just an intermediary goal. In his mind, Seth was already thinking of the future. Once he was confident in his golem arts, he would find ways to incorporate the skills of the infernal skald. There were a lot of things one could do with the help of demons, and he felt that he had barely scratched the surface. He had never any great interest in studying before, except when it was a topic he was interested in. Now, this was a topic that completely enchanted him. Just seeing what he already could do and the thought of how much more there might be in the future. There was no way he would get bored anytime soon. Returning back to the present, Seth looked up at the Monkey Knight. Yes, the future was the future, now his immediate goal was improving this and finding a way to make real bodies. Golem Artist came with the techniques to generate a body for a soul, and Seth knew, thanks to the sorceress, that it should be possible to generate a fleshly body. All that was left was the how, or rather the why it worked. The newborn Golem Mancer was rather satisfied with his new skeleton golem technology. These were a lot more useful than the elemental golems that came with the early levels of Golem Artist. Because of this, Seth decided to grind a little in this direction and see what direction Golem Artist would take in the later levels. Golem Artist Leave 4 introduced golems of mixed elements, such as a magma golem, or a storm golem. To Seth this almost felt like creating elementals at this point. But it also came with improved versions of previously introduced golems. It was undeniable that these golems also became more complex. The spell arrays for these golems were very complicated and introduced options for mechanical joints and bearings, bringing the form and range of movement of the golems closer to that of an automaton. Like his own experiments of changing shape and size, these new additions were steps to improve the efficiency of the golems. This made Seth curious how far his predecessors had gotten in his lifetime. Was Cerberus his magnum opus, or did he manage to make something even more impressive? Thinking of his CO Smith, Seth got motivated to continue. He would start with raising Golem Artisan and see where it went on the later levels. He had to keep in mind that the prepared blueprints were not everything there was to the skill. After all, even he could do a lot more with the individual arrays of the initial blueprints than the blueprints suggested. Adding Al Salzar's knowledge and blueprints on top of it, all he really lacked was the experience with the topic at this point. But that was not a problem, he did not lack materials to gather it after all. Seth had another 4 big monkey souls he could turn into monkey knights, and then he could not hide the excited smile that crept over his face. Then he would go bigger. Chapter 386 Stonehide. While Seth was busy working on his golems, Hone had been hard working on making their heat coins. The demand was great. While Seth sent Drosy with his numbers to Gamma, he left the distributions in Y City to Samuel and his people of the System Church. The blacksmith did not trust the command structure of Y City. Who knew whether some people wouldn't pinch off the cheap product here and there to sell them with a profit? Seth paid Samuel well, to make sure that the coins got into the hands of those who needed them. He had no such worries when it came to Drosy, who took it upon himself to deliver the coins to Gamma. Seth enjoyed working on the golems and took ample breaks to spend time with Mina and his friends. But maybe the happiest in Minas Mar was currently Monique, who was relieved from her duty as substitute tower master and could concentrate on raiding dungeons and training. Minas Mar settled in an enjoyable daily routine. People would go to the dungeons, work, rest, or train. There were no big events, or missions planned. Delta had become peaceful once all the field generators were repaired or replaced. Maybe it was a little too much to call it peaceful. There was a heavy discourse among the people. The topic was, of course, the situation in Beta. Minas Mar was the first to work on something akin to war relief when they used incentives to facilitate the evacuation originating from District Y. Several wealthy people, companies, and guilds joined this endeavor. Similar to Minas Mar, they saw it as a chance to not just do something good, but also to improve their reputation. And while some did not make a move at all, others called for more intense measures. The voices demanding to reinforce Beta and fight the invading force, instead of running away, became louder as more and more reports from the refugees came in. The cruelty of the Maritime Empire was nothing new to the people of Beta or Epsilon, but it was the first time for the citizens of Delta to be confronted with it. Almost 2 years after the apocalypse, the world had changed. The communication between the districts that was almost dead had recovered enough for the latest news to travel back and forth between Delta and Y City. The starved media gladly jumped at this rejuvenated source of news and gossip. The tragic histories of people and districts were quickly printed, posted, or broadcasted. And suddenly everyone had an opinion. Even though there were many voices asking for retribution, no official forces budged. Delta had a tight allegiance with the Krana Empire, and the latter had no intention of interfering in Beta. Epsilon, on the other hand, benefited a lot more from taking in the refugees, stocking up on combat-capable people, and filling the emptied cityscape left from the earlier war. Aside from all that, all higher UPS saw Beta as a minefield, thanks to the information Seth had shared. Nobody knew where exactly megacorporations like Zen Biologies had their facilities. Neither did anyone really know what happened there. Still, just knowing that any city could have a strong force loyal to the enemy, that would suddenly emerge from the underground when they expected it the least, was a huge deterrent for them to move. Only a few hardliners and some guilds set off to fight a war. Seth doubted those people would even make it past the mountain range, much less reach Beta. With the recovery of regular communication between the districts, the growing awareness of extra-dimensional threats beyond just random monsters was not the only topic among the people. The news of the other districts, the wonders, and the tragedies spread. It spawned curiosity and worry for the other districts. From the very beginning, they had never managed to establish contact with districts like Lambda in the west or Omega in the north. Higher levels had given the people greater confidence in travel, and wondrous fairy tales started to make the round. Supposed travelers spoke of riches and amicable races in the west. It was like the revival of the age of exploration, with people setting off to find their luck in the unknown. Many private expeditions set off to find out what happened in the world beyond. Guild and corporations spent huge amounts of wealth to send people away. Minas Mar was not among them. Seth had seen the terror firsthand. He could only shake his head when someone told him that there was money and fortune to be made out there. Few knew what Seth knew. His conjecture was simple. Since the Krna Empire, which had a catalogue of most calamities on Earth, chose Delta as their base of operations, it meant this was the inherently safest place. He rather kept working on his golems and items. A little more than 2 weeks went by after Seth succeeded in making the first monkey night before things in Delta began to move again. The first batch of people from Gamma would arrive in Delta, led by Princess Lena and the forces of the Krna Empire. Using it to lighten the mood of the people, a huge parade was organized to welcome the people that returned and those who came to seek shelter. In hard times like those we currently live in, solidarity was humanity's biggest strength. Or so went the advertisement. As happy as the occasion may have sounded. A big parade to welcome the heroes that saved the people of Gamma. There was also dissent and protest from the people. The Krna Empire had moved for the people of Gamma but ignored the people of Beta. Something like this. On the day of the parade, a crowd assembled at one of the main streets of Delta, where the forces of Krna and the refugees would enter from. There were primarily people cheering, but mixed in the hotchpotch were also protesters, blaming the politics of Delta and the Empire. Of course, Seth and the people of Minas Mar were also present to cheer for the princess and welcome the chimeras who would arrive together with them. The Tower Master and the Lords were even invited to the welcome banquet that would be held in the evening. There were Mary and Jane. Tecker with his daughter, Ruby, riding on his shoulders. Azul, who was looking forward to reuniting with her friends. Even Link, Allison, and Evie had crawled out of their kitchen and laboratories to see the event. Seth, who was holding Mina's hand, with Finn sitting on his shoulder. In the last weeks, Seth and the others had also spent their time bringing Pip and her friends outside to show them the city. The girls had never known how prosperous a city could be, and it was their first time in a district. It had taken weeks to get them used to the new and lively environment. It was a nice touch that their efforts now peaked in showing them a grand parade. Some of the Tija and their children had also come to bask in the festive mood. Many members of Minas Mar could not resist the temptation, and they were all surrounded by a ring of Oath Guard in full attire. Mostly to keep the children safe in the chaos. They waited for half an hour before the troops finally came into view. At the head of the parade was Princess Lena, riding an impressive warhorse. Directly followed by a guard of Imperial Knights and flag bearers. Seth was attentive enough to notice her face twitch a little when she noticed the protesters. Still, she smiled a beautiful, professional smile and waved at the otherwise cheering crowd. Behind Imperial Knights, not looking any less impressive, were the people returning to Delta. Those whose level had been too low to use home call and had now grown to experienced combatants. The ordinary soldiers brought up the rear. The refugees of Gamma and the Chimeras were not among the parade. Had they already been brought to their accommodations? The group of Minas Mar was hard to overlook, and the princess smiled in their direction, specifically at Seth and Finn on his shoulder. She even waved at them. After the parade, Azul and the rest of Team 3 went to the military accommodations to look for the Chimeras, while Seth and the others returned to Minas Mar first, to prepare for the banquet later that day. Chapter 387. Freaks and Monsters Drink Together. In the evening, Seth and the Lord of Minas Mar wore their best attire and joined the welcome banquet in a venue close to the accommodations. They were the representatives of Minas Mar, and they knew the princess. And they could go look for Team 3. Lydia and her team had not yet returned, and they could go look for them and the chimeras during the banquet. Most of them wore elegant evening attire except for some odd ones out. Jonah, for example, insisted on keeping his mask on, but he was not the worst. Of all his friends, Tecker stood out the most, looking like a walking fortress. The tall man looked like a tank, thrown in the crowd. The defense fanatic had insisted on flaunting the new armor Seth had made for him. Great Ape Armor. Unique. Unique Armor Set, 1/8. Physical.def, 3100. Mag.def 2300. Durability, 5000. 1 plus 15% to the effect of all Earth attribute skills. 2 Unbreaking armor durability will decrease slower. 3 30% damage reflection. 4 plus 25% to the strength of barriers. 5 plus 70 strength. 6 plus 70 willpower. 7 plus 70 endurance. the central piece of the armor of one of the heaviest armor sets ever created. Responsible for this abomination is Craftsman Smith in an attempt to share a past trauma with others. Special techniques and godly powers were used to grant this item power. Once rumors of the armor's power spread or it plays a role in the user's ascent to a legend, the item might become legendary. Set effect, 8/8. Active skill, Cry of Eris, no cost, cooldown 15 min. All aggro in range of the war cry is absorbed and doubled. Requirements, 300 strength, 300 endurance. After getting his hands on vast amounts of heavy Wugram, Seth set out to turn Tekker into the likeness of a boss-level character of disgusting difficulty. The Bastion granted Tekker barrier skills and defense based on the weight of armor. Following these characteristics of the Bastion, Seth used a mixture of heavy Wugram and artificial adamantium to max out the defense and weight of the armor. Except for the divine enchantment Curse of Eris, which slightly changed after it had a synergy with the massive soul of the great AP used for the full armor. It was the soul he had collected after his fight with the pseudo-swamp dragon. Since the Bastion increased his defense according to the weight of the armor and when he did not move, Seth fashioned him a huge shield from the shell of a giant tortoise, he found in the storage. And reinforced with artificial adamantium. Looking through the storage rooms had filled Seth's heart with joy. Little to nothing of the materials his friends and the Oath Guard had harvested during his absence was sold away. The sight of rooms over rooms stuffed with materials, and the appreciation for his friends were the biggest reasons why he took some of his time to rework some of the items he had made at the stronghold. The tortoise shell had a slow effect in exchange for greatly increasing the defense when blocking. Seth also added a row of ground anchors that could pierce the ground and give additional support. Lethargic Bulwark. Relic. Physical.def, 3300, plus 350. Mag.def 2500, plus 350. Durability, 5000. 1 plus 200% defense when blocking. 2 minus 30% movement speed. 3 unbreaking armor durability will decrease slower. 4 burden item weight is doubled. 5 plus 30% damage reflection. 6 plus 25% to the strength of barriers. A great shield, so heavy it could crush any ordinary man. Another incomprehensible piece from the hand of Craftsman Smith. Technical details grant plus 10% defense when blocking. Once rumors of the shield's power spread or it plays a role in the user's ascent to a legend, the item might become legendary. Requirements, 400 strength. Fortunately, Tekker was not lugging around the giant club Seth had made from the femur of a big drake. It was the last piece that would have finished the boss mob aesthetic. Their group was only one of many that greeted the busy princess, who was busy dealing with a lot of people. Despite that, she found the time to ask Seth for a meeting at a later date. Seth had no big interest in the banquet. There were a lot of influential people, standing around, talking, drinking alcohol. He disliked it, even more, when he realized that he was only slightly less busy than the princess. A lot of business people suddenly came looking for the Tower Master of Minas March. They were not just a guild, but also a huge source of revenue people would like to invest in. Seth signaled his people, gave a few half-hearted answers before using an excuse to go to the toilet and flee the premises. They had greeted the princess. Their duty was done. Now, they could finally go and meet up with the chimeras at the accommodations close by. When they came there, they found a much more high-spirited party going on. The chimeras had made a big fire at the training grounds and plundered the alcohol of the banquet's catering. Among them, they also found Lydia, Azul, and the rest of Team 3 happily drinking and laughing. Many of the people from Gamma had also joined the rambunctious occasion. They had gotten quite friendly with the bunch, despite their rather awkward appearance. Seth realized that he had worried for nothing, and he smiled relieved. This venue seemed a lot more fun than the stiff banquet hall. Caravan leader. Join us, the current leader of the Chimeras, Azul's right-hand man hollered. He was a huge guy with the fur of a bear beast covering his body and the head of an orc. They did not need to be asked twice. The people of Minas Mar happily joined. Link brought out his own food and drinks and the mood became even more lively. Seth and Mina started drinking and soon people started passing out. In the end, everyone was defeated by the alcohol demon Finn. When Seth woke up again, he stared right in the face of the sleeping Mina, who was lying on him. Looking around, the training grounds were strewn with sleeping people and chimeras. The scene was quite funny, seeing some human drinking buddies in the, often several, arms of their chimera friends, sleeping with a happy smile on their faces. Some pairs went even further. Pictures that may be burned into the blacksmith's memory forever and haunt him in his nightmares. He woke the other and the acting leader of the chimeras. A very original guy who named himself Orspurt, because of his orc head and the fur of a bear. Seth handed the half-asleep chimera a chest. Take these. With these rings, you will be able to enter Minas Mar, once the formalities are finished. That's right. The reason why Lydia had not brought the chimeras directly to Minas Mar, was because they still needed to wait for their citizenship to be made official. This had been part of the deal Seth had made with the rescue forces when he left the chimeras with them. Azul took the chest instead. This guy is too drunk to think straight. I wish to stay with them for the time being and make sure everyone gets their ring. Yes, that will be better that way. Thank you, Azul. Carrying the still passed out Mina and sleeping Finn, the two had looked the deepest in the glass. Seth returned to Minas Mar with the others. A few days later he got a message from the princess pertaining to the meeting she had asked for. The invitation invited him to the private mansion of the princess. The blacksmith had never been inside, but he knew the place because Mina and the others had worked here when he first came to Delta. It was a lavish mansion built in the style of the Empire and close to the Empire's embassy. He had some conjecture, but ultimately, he entered the place with curiosity. Let's see what the princess wants, he mumbled to himself before passing the guards and entering. Chapter 388. Hell bent for the tether. Gamma. Traveling on the Jinn who had transformed into a majestic lion, the journey to Gamma from Y City had only taken her mere days. Returning to her origin was kind of nostalgic. Much had changed from the days when the Zarkist went rampant, and the people could only hide in shelter from the lunatics and monsters that kept flooding from the broken dungeons. She found a shaky order had taken root in Gamma. A fragile balance between something called the Krana Empire and Arjit Noor. Both were invaders from another world, one human and one undead. The Rakshasa had heard of the undead hordes before she was betrayed by the people she had tried to protect. Back then, they had killed anyone that crossed their paths. She had heard of the Empire in Y City. They came through the same connection as the monsters. It was the Krana Empire that had saved Delta and negotiated with Arjit Noor to even evacuate the survivors. Arguably this was better than the chaos that reigned in her time, but she didn't like it. What had these people done to deserve salvation? She had fought for them, and they had betrayed her. They were responsible for the death of her comrades, her sister's boyfriend, everything she had left in this world. Seeing the old places, the old faces, a wrath she had thought was cooled, was reignited once again. However, she held back. She had not come to seek vengeance. Heart of Steel helped her to fight down these emotions, that would only hinder her objective. She came to find information on Zarkan and to make sure that the nightmare had really ended. With her hood pulled deep into her face, she entered the refugee camp that had been built outside the place called Astarta village. As serious as she was, even she smiled at the irony in calling it something so close like Starter Village where newbies in games would spawn the first time. But nobody would be able to see the small smile playing around her lips. She could not risk anyone seeing her face. It had changed ever since she had gotten the class of Rakshasa. As the terrible hunger forced her to consume human meat, her appearance changed the more of it she consumed. Her canines had grown like those of a vampire and the irises of her eyes had become an iridescent gold. The changes had become more obvious when the weird techniques of the foreigner kept hitting her. She did not even trust the hood's shadow to hide her features and kept a low-level illusion active at all times when among people. There were many people, refugees, and soldiers. There were even some creatures of various appearances merrily drinking among them. The mood seemed good, and she soon learned why from floating conversations. Royalty had successfully returned from a rescue mission or something of the sort. The merry crowd and chaos made it easy for her to gain the information she was looking for. She simply chose one of the lower-leveled officers of the Krona Empire she was confident in manipulating and seduced him. Faced with her high level of illusion magic, coupled with her seductive curves, the man could not resist. He told her everything he knew. He was one of the people who had returned with the Allied forces from the rescue mission. The man told her of the battle with the Zarkists and its sudden end. How the Tower Master of Minas Mar led a caravan of escapees and was the one responsible for ending the champion of Zarkan. She wanted to visit the place and the man even drew her a rough map, so she could find it. All for the price of some sweet nothings whispered in his ears and a happy dream he enjoyed alone, while she had already left for her new destination. What she did not notice was a shadow observing everything she did. It was later, after she had already left Gamma on the back of her Jinn, that she noticed someone following her. Throwing out an illusion array to capture her pursuer, she came to a halt on a clearing in the wilderness. Besides the AoE illusion technique, she jumped off the Jinn, getting ready for battle in mid-jump. Dark poison claws extended from her fingers and the petite woman grew to the size of a 3M giantess with bulging muscles. Her golden eyes pierced through the night, fixing onto the dark figure that stopped just outside the ranger of her magic trap. "Why are you following me?" Hot steam escaped her mouth and she got ready to react with magic if the other attacked. "Calm down. If we wanted to harm you, we could have done so a long time ago," the figure spoke calmly, and another 6 shadows suddenly appeared at the edge of her magic. She was already surrounded. No, much worse, she had no idea those had been there. This meant the one in front of her had revealed its existence on purpose. It also meant there could be any number of shadows still hidden in the forest. The thought almost made her panic, but what the shadow said was right. They could have ambushed her any time. She calmed her thoughts and lowered her claws. "What do you want from me?" she asked controlled. "Our lady wishes to have a conversation with you." "Your lady? Princess Lena of Krina? The princess of the empire? Why would she want to talk to me? You have touched one of our people. The fact that you did not harm him, is the only reason this stays a civilized conversation. However, your skills are intriguing, and your potential is unknown. You are a hidden talent. That is why the lady wishes to speak with you. Do I have a choice?" "Of course. To meet her for a light-hearted chat, or to meet her in chains. The choice is yours." Her eyes scanned the figures that surrounded her. She was unable to see their level, their power, she could not even detect their souls. But she knew for a fact, they were real and strong. Terrifyingly so. "I guess, I can make some time in my busy schedule for a member of royalty," she said and shrank back to her petite size. "Good choice." The shadow's voice sounded a lot more friendly and a little relieved. This made her feel reassured. She knew he was not worried about any of them were hurt in a fight. It seemed that a friendly relationship with her was that much more preferable to them. While the other shadows hid their presence again, she followed their leader on the Jinn's back. He led her back to Gamma, back to Starta village. Their destination was a small but imposing building. After sending the Jinn back, she was led to an office. The decorations looked dignified and expensive but not lavish. A beautiful woman, with a quite modern style of makeup but a foreign style of clothes sat at the desk, looking at her. This must have been the princess. "So, you are the girl that used illusion magic on one of my people?" Lena asked friendly. "Yes," she answered warily. This person did not seem angry, but the bunch of people that could end her life intimidated her just a little. "You asked for information on the Zarkists. What is your relationship with the champion of Zarkon?" She clenched her fist and stared at the princess. Did this woman imply that she had ties with that bastard? I guess you don't like him, based on your reaction. I see that you are not completely human. Is that the side effect of your class? Or did you swallow something weird?" the princess suddenly asked. She realized that she had forgotten to reapply the illusion magic that hid her face. "Don't worry, nobody here will judge you. I did not want to antagonize you," the princess reassured her. "Then what do you want?" "In the ideal case, I would wish to help you and ask you to join the Krina Empire," she said with a radiating smile. The comment was like a slap in her face. Help her? And she was trying to recruit her without knowing anything? Wouldn't they just stake her the moment she told them about her class? But did she really have a choice? "Of course, I would need to know your goal first." She was unsure whether to trust these people or not. She couldn't fight her way out. Maybe she could lie? No, she was a terrible liar without the magic. She was racking her brain and finally took a deep breath. Fuck it. The Rakshasa girl told them everything. She let it all out like a drunkard. It had been ages since she had someone to talk to and now the dams broke. All the tragic, her self-pity and loathing. She kept rambling for hours. She even started crying at one point. Lena also cried at one point. The guards felt mostly awkward. After listening to the rather chaotic mix of stories and personal misery, Lena could not help but sympathize with the poor girl in front of her. If your wish is to get rid of the remaining Zarkist, then I may have a lead for you, she said and took something out from her inventory. It was a roughly square metal plate. It was bent and covered in half-molten inscriptions and magic circles. But the outer appearance did not matter. The girl's golden eyes, slightly swollen from crying, lit up when she saw that this piece of metal was actually inhabited by a living soul. How was that even possible? That wasn't all. From the soul burning within the plate of metal, hundreds of tethers spread out into infinity, losing their light in a far-off distance. She knew these tethers, they were what kept the Zarkists alive and their soul from moving on, despite their body dying. Being the center of these tethers could only mean one thing. This was the soul of the champion of Zarkon. It was not dead but sealed in this unassuming piece of metal. With this, she could hunt down all the Zarkists left in the world. Our seers found it when we looked for a way to wipe out the Zarkists. There is a fate with them, but we could not discern what was the exact reason. However, you seem to have an idea. She swallowed her saliva and nodded, trying to stay calm. What would you ask of me in exchange for that plate? Just a favor and some of your time. How does that sound? We have a deal. Chapter 389. Wishin the Bard was by my side. Seth was led into a big room. It was shaped like an octagon and in the middle of the room stood a massive, heavy-looking table. At the round table sat the princess, a bunch of people Seth didn't know, and one he wished he didn't know. One of the people sitting at the desk was the self-proclaimed adventurer king. Seth had enjoyed a sweet time of peace, having forgotten this person's existence after the tournament incident. What was his name again? Seth tried to remember. When the other saw Seth, his face became an enraged grimace and he jumped off his seat. What is this fraud doing here? Are you trying to offend me, the great Darogue? He exclaimed wildly, throwing his hands around. Ah, yes, that was his name. But what exactly was going on? Who is this guy, to arrogantly proclaim his name like that, in the presence of the great me? Puffles muttered displeased. Ah, yes. Surrounded by greatness, Seth sat down at the seat he was shown to. Please calm down, Mr. Darogue. I do not know what happened between you, but Minasmar has not given what they owe me. That is what is going on. After I clearly won the tournament, they used shady excuses to withhold my prize, the arrogant hunk interrupted the princess who tried to calm the situation. Shady excuses? Seth thought to himself as the Muscleman rambled on. The guy was livid and kept hammering with his fist on the table. They proclaimed there was no winner because of ongoing the abduction of my opponent and the Tower Master. Since my opponent was not present, I should have won by default, he literally made air quotes. Seth looked at the raging man in disbelief. He could roughly guess what had happened. He made a mental note to praise Mary and Jane once he returned. He couldn't help but enjoy Darogue's raging with a humored smile on his face. What are you smiling for? If it wasn't for this being an official event, I would have already started massaging you into the ground. Seth lifted an eyebrow in surprise. I didn't expect you to have this much tactfulness. To only hit the table and cry like a little child in front of the princess. Truly, your self-control knows no limits, the blacksmith ridiculed him. You. Stop. Mr. Darogue, sit down. Solve your private matters somewhere else, the princess finally said seriously. Her tone made clear that this was over, or else someone would get kicked out, and Seth was not the one. Indignantly, the adventurer king shut up and sat back down. Oh, what a funny table round. Looks like I came at just the right time. A man with snow-white hair and crimson eyes had entered the room and took sat at one of the free chairs. No, not a man. Seth remembered him. This was the mist demon that had fought with Darogue during the tournament. Darogue seemed like he wanted to say something but kept quiet when he saw Lena giving him a side glance. They waited for another 2 minutes in awkward silence as another 3 familiar faces appeared. Marcel, Elsa, and Brock of the Boulder Guild appeared together. Since everyone is finally here, we can officially start this meeting. The princess started the event. All of you are people of great talent and power from or associated with Earth. I have assembled you today because I need your help. Every year, the Empire will evaluate the worth of investing in foreign worlds and whether to get more involved or pull back, depending on the circumstances. As you may have heard, the Maritime Empire had strengthened its efforts on Earth and invaded Beta. What's more, is that Earth itself is quite a dangerous world on its own. Factions within the Empire have announced their doubts concerning our endeavors on Earth, as we may end up facing them sooner or later. Normally a new world won't be tested this early, but because of them, we must take part in the next evaluation 3 months from now. You are the most promising individuals and leaders associated with the Empire on Earth. I wish to ask you to take part in this time's evaluation. Depending on your performance, I might be able to secure more funds and reinforcement for the future stability of Earth. Silence reigned in the room after the princess finished. Seth was in deep thought. He had heard of this practice during his travels to Aura. However, what he had heard was slightly different from what the princess had described. About the numerous heirs to the throne being sent to new worlds to develop colonies. But he remembered, when Tord explained to him about the history of Aura, that there was a different reason for these evaluations. It was to judge the potential of the heirs and their skills in governing and problem solving. This didn't mean that the evaluation was not also about judging the worth of further investments. It was also very likely that the princess would be able to organize more support if she did well. While everyone was in their own thoughts, like Seth, someone suddenly spoke up. It's not very nice to withhold information, princess. It was the demon speaking. What do you? Undeterred, the demon continued to say out loud what Seth had just thought, in even more depth. The princess was the 24th in succession to the throne and she was competing with 3 others for a rank that would allow her to become the queen of a province. It was slightly less dramatic than if she was directly competing for the seat of the emperor. Nonetheless, he laid out her secrets for everyone to see before proclaiming to join the evaluation. The princess was less than displeased, while the demon watched the situation he had created with a gleeful smile. Just like Seth, who had not liked the fact that she withheld information, most around the table were now in conflict about their decision to join or not. Even Drogue was silent, though his expression indicated he was thinking something stupid. Only one girl and a man seemed to not care at all. It seemed that the demon had broken her pace. The princess wavered and just observed the people at the table deliberating with themselves. Seth decided to help just a little. How about you explain to us what exactly this evaluation is? And I am sure you don't expect us to simply join you just for something vague like the sake of humanity, right? Hastily grabbing onto the lifeline Seth had thrown out, she once again took the floor and continued her speech. She explained that the evaluation would be a quest given by the emperor and she did not know the details. The requirement for the evaluation was for each colony to form a party from the most promising people. The parties would compete on the quest. Observers would judge their actions and potential. Their performance and result of the quest would all be part of the final evaluation. As for the remunerations, since all of you are unique, I would like to discuss them individually. Nobody spoke. Even though there were more nods and positive expressions among the people than before, many excused themselves and left without even talking about the remuneration. She effectively asked them to travel to a foreign land, for an unknown time. The task was vague, the reward was vague, and many of them had a business they could not simply leave behind for some fantastic quest. Seth was rather surprised that people like Marcel and Brock stayed since they had guilds to lead. Why did he stay? It sounded interesting. Who would leave before even knowing what was there to gain? He also wanted to ask about the sword he had lent the princess for appraisal. The blacksmith was not confident enough to simply hand his friends weapons that could bring harm to them. If the Empire's appraisals worked, he could think about making a deal with them. I will take everyone's presence as the agreement to leave, as long as the reward is fitting. Lena spoke up after those people left. Most nodded or murmured in agreement. Then shall we proceed to discuss the rewards? I would ask each of you individually to my office for a private negotiation. In the meantime, we have prepared a buffet for those who will wait here. Who wishes to go first? Drogue, the sun macho, immediately squeezed in the front, to be the first. The princess looked a little sad but proceeded to leave with him, leaving the others behind. Left in the room was a group of 11 people, including Seth. There were 4 women, 6 men, and a demon. As Seth beelined for the buffet, Elsa and Marcel approached him. Brock was pulled along. Seth. I knew you would be here, too. It's been quite a while since we last met. Marcel started a conversation. His warm voice was naturally charismatic. No wonder he was a guild leader. Yes, it's been quite long, Seth answered with a smile, while he filled his dish. Ah, let me introduce him. This is Brock, the guild leader of the Boulder Guild. Yeah, I remember him from the tournament. Hello. Hello. Brock shook his hand, motivated. If he could forge a connection with Minas Mars Tower Master, maybe he would get a chance to buy epic equipment. Actually, I am surprised that you two are still here. Don't you have a guild to take care of? Seth made small talk, but judging from their expressions he had dropped a brick. What's up? Actually, our guilds disbanded while we were gone. The Volcano Guild broke up into smaller ones and the Mountain Guild could not compete anymore and completely disbanded. Marcel explained belatedly. Elsa looked up to him and squeezed his hand tightly. Look at you. You lost something, but didn't you find something much better? Elsa blushed and Marcel chuckled awkwardly. Currently, they were hired as mercenaries by the Boulder Guild, since Brock was an old friend. Except for them, the others did not seem to know each other previously and stayed for themselves at the moment. 10 to 15 minutes later, Derogue and the princes returned. More or less. The severely bruised and beaten Derogue could be seen being pulled through the hallway past the door. A dark blue, almost black handprint shone on his cheek. This guy would probably not join the evaluation. Tower Master, would you give me the honor to follow me next? Seth threw a wistful glance at the buffet he would leave behind. If you promise me that I won't end up like him. I promise. I don't believe you are a person that would try anything funny, she answered with a menacing business smile that was meant for everyone. Chapter 390. Anything you're missing. Sitting inside a big, regal salon, they faced each other only divided by a small coffee table with sweets and drinks. She took a sip of her coffee and spoke up. First of all, I'm glad you did not leave right away. I know it's much to ask since you yourself have returned not too long ago. On the other hand, I expected nothing less after I saw your engagement to help with the situation in Beta. Seth decided to just listen for now and kept sipping the tea he was offered. He wasn't a coffee person. I realize that I cannot ask you to follow out of goodwill. As long as it stays within limits, I can offer you anything you are missing. What was he missing? Seth felt very satisfied with his current life. He could freely explore the reaches of his class. He did not lack materials. The blacksmith already had a hard time just browsing through all the materials his friends had collected while he was gone. He had a beautiful girlfriend and reliable friends. Thinking long and hard about what the princess had, that he wanted, he finally had an idea. I want 2 more of the machines that condense mana and the right to produce as many as I want for my own purposes. The princess, who had been elegantly sipping her coffee and watching him as he deliberated, spit out a fountain in shock. Are you crazy? She screamed before hurriedly trying to compose herself again. No. No, 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 I can't do that. Do you know what you are asking of me? Even I wouldn't be allowed to just up and do that. What he was asking was something tremendously dangerous. To freely produce highly condensed energy sources, even if it was just for his own use. It was one thing if he used some of those minas Mar produced under the hand, but officially giving him permission to do as he liked was something totally different. The machines and crystals were under strict control by the Empire. The produced crystals could be easily used for nefarious purposes. This ranged from powering machines, illegal experiments up to directly using them to build mana bombs. Seth had thrown it on the table because it would have been an easy way to power the golems. Sure, it was no self-reloading core like the other options, but as an exchangeable battery, it would have been great for test golems. Since this did not seem like an option to the princess, he thought of something else. How about the production method of Ithildan? This was a refined version of Mithril. Seth had gotten his hands on some faulty Ithildan when he looted the Theocracy's stronghold. Even the faulty version was as good a Fey steel when it came to magic conductivity. Ehehe, let's talk about those magic crystals. I am sure I could find a way to budget a specific amount under your name. We just need a good excuse like research. Yes. As long as it gets approved, we are golden. What do you think? Sounds kind of vague. Before I can agree, we have to negotiate the amount and make sure it works. And I still have to talk about this with Mina and the others. Please wait moment, she said and left Seth alone with the sweets in the salon. How rude. Seth shook his head and made sure there would be nothing left by the time she returned. Puffles and the Emuji also claimed their share of the sweets. She returned a while after the last sweet had left the table. She halted for a second when she faced the cleaned plates. Here is my offer. I can guarantee you the permission to produce 150 mana crystals per month for your own use. I see. Okay, if you would excuse me for a moment, he stayed seated and stared at her. Do you want me to make my private calls in the hallway? Take your time. I will continue to talk with the others. She stood up and left. Seth first called Mina and told her about what had just happened. What? You were chosen for the evaluation? You have to go, she exclaimed joyfully. Why do you sound so happy? Because we get a free ride to visit the capital of Krina. Do you have any idea how hard it is to get permission to just enter that city? Also, it's a big chance. The evaluation is normally broadcasted to the most important cities of the empire. You could become a celebrity. This meant, even though the demon had spilled the beans, he had not spilled all of them. I see, so you have no problem with me leaving, as long as I bring you along on a vacation. Don't make it sound like I'm selling you. I wanted to go on a vacation together for a long time now. We can visit Krna, the timeless city, to boot. After Mina's enthusiastic agreement, Seth called Mary to speak about the business side of things. However, there were no problems with his absence, as long as he left a stockpile of goods for the shop and their deal with Y-City. With Hone, Whedon and Cerberus he was confident to do that before he had to set off 3 months later. It seemed that nothing stood in the way of his participation, except for Mina's remark. Everything would be broadcasted. Seth was not sure whether he was happy about that. He had thought about expanding their business on Earth, but the Empire was a little too much. This would be a great advertisement for his items if he could show their performance to such a huge audience. However, this was not really what he wanted at the moment. What would happen if he was successful? There would be a lot of people, most likely many nobles asking for his services, and he would become terribly busy. Even if he turned down commissions to make time for his own stuff, it meant offending a bunch of unknown, but probably powerful people in places outside his reach. They were barely international. It was simply not time yet for Minas Mar to go interdimensional. After brooding over the problem for a while, Seth had an idea to not only evade the worst case but to even make the adventure a worthwhile journey. The princess, who had gone for the next interviews, came back 10 minutes later after a guard informed her that Seth had made his decision. I heard you came to a conclusion. Yes, I agree to come along for the evaluation if Mina and the others can come along for a vacation in Krna. And the crystal agreement up front, of course. Great. On that note, can I ask you to equip the members of the evaluation? I don't make items for people I don't know or trust. Why are you asking me anyway? You are the princess, shouldn't you be able to supply them with good items? He asked after seeing her crestfallen expression. I can't. The rules of the evaluation state that the participants cannot be helped by external sources. It's an evaluation of this domain, so anything they take part with has to come from Earth. Equipment, potions, food, everything had to have been made or spawned here. You didn't ask me to join this, so you could get free equipment, right? Just for your information. I don't intend to join as a blacksmith. Seth said determinedly. And not as a blacksmith. Nope, I will be joining as a bard, my second class. The princess broke. Her eyes were empty, and her smile had frozen in time. It made Seth feel a little bad. Depending on the team, I could sell them epic items and maybe at a discount. Seth complied. He really would not mind accommodating Elsa and Marcel, maybe even Brock since he was their friend. Giving them a discount was no big deal. He might even consider handing them things for free. Seth still had some qualms about selling his epic equipment, but lately, he had come up with a new safety precaution thanks to crafty failsafe leveling up. That would be great. I will organize a party in a few days, so the final members can get to know each other. I'm sure you will find them trustworthy. We will see. As they finalized everything they spoke about, Seth remembered something else. Can we add a good music instrument to the rewards? Although Seth ultimately would have wanted to make his instruments himself, the instrument maker skill was very different from his blacksmithing. His high dexterity helped a lot, but ultimately it was a whole different process. He currently had not the time to hone the skill. Compared to his previous demands, this was a very light one, and the princess readily agreed for him to choose one from the Imperial collection after the evaluation was successful. After putting everything to paper, Seth signed a contract to join the team of Earth for the Imperial evaluation, 3 months later. There was another thing. Since we are already talking in private. What happened to the sword I gave you? You know, the one made from an angel's arm. Oh, yes. It's still being tested. I'm sure you can get it personally once we arrive in Krna, she said happily with his contract in her hands. Seth felt quite satisfied himself, with the permission to use more magic crystals for his experiments. 3 months was neither long nor terribly short. There was a lot to do and prepare until he had to leave. Chapter 391. Good vibes. Seth came by the octagonal room again and said his goodbyes to Marcel, Elsa, Brock, before following a butler to leave. His head was filled with the things he needed to do in the coming days. Now that he could officially use magic crystals as a cheap additional power source, he would be able to make more test golems without worrying about squandering expensive materials. Thanks to this, he was sure to level up Golem Artisan again and make the next step. An excited beast woman was already waiting for him when he returned to Mina's march. "Tell me everything. In detail," she commanded with sparkling eyes. He did not understand why she was so hyped but gladly sat down with her to narrate what had happened. She smiled approvingly when he told Mina how he helped the princess. "Oof. Why," he moaned in pain when she gave him an elbow check in the ribs. He had just described the negotiations. "You were rude to the princess. You know that I like her. She's a good person, so you should show her some more respect." He nodded awkwardly and continued the story. When he finally ended, Mina suddenly stood up and pulled him off his seat. "What are you doing?" "That's my question. Why are you dawdling around? We should go and get you an instrument right now." "Why right now? Don't you have to practice a lot to learn a musical instrument? If you want to shine as a bard in the evaluation, you should start practicing as soon as possible." "Let's go on a shopping date to look for one," she answered motivated. Seth could only smile wryly as she pulled him along. Wasn't it her who asked him to sit down and talk? He did not resist the soft hand that was leading the way to the surface elevator at the center of the tower. Informing the others? Making golem or item? All that could wait for now. Despite his fiddling around with items and golems, Seth had made sure to prioritize Mina and his friends in the past weeks. The blacksmith found his life much more enjoyable this way. He happily dropped the thoughts of work and ran off with Mina. Although it was to look for an instrument, it was a date in the end. They strolled through the streets of Delta, after exiting the surface building of Mina's march. It was more humbled than the Willis building that stood here before and leaned more into the architectural style of the Krna Empire. After it was finished, it became the kingdom of Mary and her subordinates of the administration. On the surface, the city had not changed. But at a closer look one saw many more shops and stores for all kinds of magical items with the signs of different merchant and adventurer guilds on them. The turquoise anvil as an outlet for a guild was no unique idea, to begin with, but there was now much more competition. It was one of the reasons Nico Booz had finally decided to officially join Minas Mar during Seth's absence. The disaster in Delta had been hard on his business. And now that more and cheaper products from native and foreign merchants flooded the market, he had finally decided to give up on his own store and join Seth. The blacksmith had reluctantly allowed the tailor to sell his superhero suits at the turquoise anvil, as long as he made cloth armor for Minas March. The spell weaver's items could be comfortably worn under the armor and could give passive improvements if Seth infused them with a soul, or Hone added a power nucleus. They kept window shopping here and there, but despite the increase in diversity in goods, they could not find anything interesting in Delta. However, Mina seemed to have a goal and Seth followed her as she steered toward the demon district. Seth had a vague idea where she was leading him. Just like how there was a kind of blacksmith district for demonic bards, adjacent to it was something similar for instrument makers. There was the place where he had also wanted to go later, to look for an instrument. Mina led him to the demonic instrument bazaar. Since many demon factions were prominent traders, the demon district had many specialized bazaars and marketplaces like this. "How do you even know about this place?" "Oh, I came past it on a stroll with Ember." "Ember? How do you know her?" Seth asked curiously. The demon girl from the bar college had never mentioned knowing his girlfriend. "She came by Minas Mar after you were abducted. She was quite worried at the time." "So that girl could be worried too," Seth mumbled. The many different stalls offered a myriad of enchanted instruments. Things they made, things they bought. There were also a lot of stalls for used goods that advertised with the private instruments of well-known and legendary demonic bards, human bards, or minstrels. They also sold all kinds of sheet music in thick stacks. The number of old instruments and songs sold in bundles was the harsh reality of the bard's business. Many got the class and aspired to be musicians, but most of them failed. Degraded to street musicians or helpers in workshops, they could only sell their work and instruments, together with their dream of making it big. Often, they would change their class at the next possible opportunity. Seth's instrument mastery gave him the possibility to learn the ropes of any instrument quickly. But similar to weapon mastery, the immediate use depended on the level of the skill, which was beginner level 4 for Seth. That meant that Mina was kind of right. If he wanted to accompany his songs with an instrument, he would have to practice with it. Getting one as early as possible was the right choice. But which should he take? Instrument Maker allowed him to appraise the instruments, but since its level was similarly low, Seth felt almost blind in this market. It was still fun to go around together with the Catwoman and test out different instruments. There were many exotic variations that used magic in similar ways to electric instruments. A magic piano board or stringed instruments without a body like e-guitars. The only drawback of those was that they used additional magic to be played. For some, Seth had seen the blueprints in his catalog but had not tried making one yet. Others he saw for the first time. There were also alien-looking instruments for non-humanoid races. Like wind instruments that needed 4 hands to play correctly. Or triple drum sets that needed more pairs of legs and arms. They came across a lot of intriguing and interesting instruments and Seth would try each and every one to play for a little while for Mina. However, none really captivated him. That was until H noticed one specific instrument. A special lyre. Made from the skull of a demon with long black horns, shaped like an omega. The strings were stretched between the skull, which acted as a sound body, and a bar fastened between the horns. It was not its design that caught his attention. This was a demonic bazaar. A lot of instruments featured skull designs or were fashioned from bones and skulls, themselves. It did not even stick out from the pile of instruments it was stuck in. It was not even the only instrument with an ego he had seen on the bazaar. He could completely inspect it, despite his low level in Instrument Maker. What caught Seth's attention was that it had a soul. Lyre of ounce. Unique ego. Durability, 666. 1 self-tuning. 2 self-repairing. 3 self-playing. 4 plus 50% proficiency gain in instrument mastery. 5 plus 80% effect of music skills. 6 ballads of ounce. 7 hordes of ounce. Made from the skull of Ounce, a well-known demon musician of his time. Often polarizing because of his hard take on music. Following his last wishes, a master created this lyre from his skull and sealed his soul inside. Requirements: gain the recognition of Ounce. Ballads of Ounce would give access to the song Ounce had created in his lifetime. Hordes of Ounce would summon swarms of demon bats with every strumming of the lyre, that would proceed to attack the enemy. Are you interested in that thing? You should give up. Even though it has an ego and good effects, it's a non-seller since it has to recognize its master, he sighed. Do you know how happy I was when I managed to buy it for a lot of money and the despair when I found out that it was unusable? How much? Seth asked, distracted. He tried to communicate with the ego of the soul, but it had degraded to the point where Seth could only perceive emotions but not clear thoughts. You really want to buy it? Did it recognize you? No, but I wish to buy it anyway, Seth said and tried to play the string, but the unique lyre remained silent. 5 gold. I need to make back at least some of my losses. Mina was a little confused why Seth bought an instrument he could not use, but the blacksmith only smiled and paid the price. This was expensive for an instrument one could not use, but for him, it was just right. Seth already had an idea what to do with the lyre. Chapter 392. Work, and gushing. Seth and Mina kept enjoying the day together and returned to Mina's mar in the evening. Both had to endure Mary's scolding about just running off. Here, this letter came from Aura. Seth took it excitedly. It was from Nadal. Seth had sent the craftsman tailor a sample of Puffle's sky silk. He had hoped for the tailor to make him a new set of shirt and pants he could wear under the golden fleece. Unfortunately, it was no good news. To sum it up, Nadal apologized. The sky silk was a unique material he could not process with his skills. It needed precise requirements. The great me could have told you that, too. What do you mean? Seth answered with telepathy. A tailor needs the blessing of our god to works with the sky silk. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Had he known, he would not have bothered Nadal in the first place. You didn't ask. So, the sky silk is useless? What are you saying? Don't belittle our ultimate thread. You just need a tailor that can receive the blessing. Wait, are you saying, you can give out your god's divine blessing? Do you finally recognize my greatness? Yet, Puffles, the greatest of them all. He placated the nightmare centipede. What do you need to bless someone? Just the tailor is enough. After the blessing, he will be able to take on the class to work with sky silk. Where am I supposed to get a tailor from? Seth grumbled. They could not go to Aura because of the system god's shenanigans. Asking Nadal to come here was already a lot, but to change his class, just because Seth wanted a better pair of pants? Don't we have that booze guy? Didn't you throw ancient bronze and celestial bronze at him to make stuff for the others? You mean Nico Booze? It was true. Seth had given him materials to make some stuff and level his skill. The tailor was in the early stage of the craftsman tier and barely able to work with celestial bronze. As far as Seth knew, Booze did not have a second class yet. If they pulled him to level 50, he would be able to take on Puffle's class as a secondary one. As long as he agreed, and they worked fast, maybe he could finish the things until Seth had to leave. Having the tailor in-house gave Seth another idea, for what he wanted to be made from sky silk. Good, we will do that. The blacksmith immediately gave Booze a visit and showed him the new thread. Although they did not share tastes, the tailor was even crazier for new materials than Seth. He respected that. When Booze heard the conditions to work with the sky silk, he immediately agreed. It was like he had entered heaven. He could not only work with epic materials, but he was even offered the chance to gain an ancient tailor class. He would have to be stupid to say no. And so started his suffering, as parties of the Oath Guard kept pulling him through dungeons, to get him to leave 50 as fast as possible. In the meantime, Seth returned to his workshop and split his time there between working on the golems and helping Cerberus to stockpile merchandise. However, the first thing he did was take care of his new lyre, so he could start practicing as soon as possible. When he first saw it, he had almost thought that he had found an item of his predecessor. Upon closer inspection, it was not like that. Yes, someone had caught the soul of a dead person and sealed it in the person's skull, but because it lacked the techniques of Seth's class, the soul deteriorated with time. It was like making pottery. If the bowl was not correctly burned and sealed, it would leak water. Without the treatment of the waters of Styx, the soul inside was just bound by chains and corroded by time, instead of living in the item as if it is its body. Seth extracted the damaged soul from the lyre. Soul of ounce, medium, epic, ego, damaged, crafting material. The ancient soul of a great bard. Corroded by time. With the soul extracted, Seth first started working on the lyre's body. The skull had many cracks from age, which he was able to repair with instrument maker and energy circulation, too. He also exchanged the crossbar, string and turning bulges for better ones he had bought at the market. Then he turned to the soul. To repair the damage done by time, he infused several small souls and started to refine the soul. It was the perk unlocked thanks to Soul Forging Leave 7. Refining the soul was similar to the way blacksmiths can homogenize and get rid of impurities in iron or steel by continuously forging and folding the material. In Seth's case, this meant memories. Souls were bundles of energy and memory fragments. Common souls had very few native memories, which made them useless to gain special effects on an item but great for fixing other souls. By refining the soul of ounce, he was able to get rid of the useless memories he had introduced to it, but he was also able to organize the present memories. This way he was able to repair the damaged soul to a certain extent and hopefully restore the ego to a state he was able to communicate with. This was also a good practice. Ounce still had his personality, just that it was diffused over time. Seth expected that with more experience he would be able to restore egos to his higher quality souls. He had two goals he definitely wanted to achieve before he had to leave. One of them had to do with refining souls. Watching the damaged memory fragments burn away as floating embers after they were forged out of the soul, Seth could see the soul turn visibly more sublime. He had succeeded in refining the soul and restoring the ego. Who are you? Seth got an answer when he tried to communicate with telepathy. The voice was rough and slightly confused, like someone who just woke up from a long dream. My name is Seth. I repaired your soul. You did what? My soul? Wait, am I dead? Dave Fugue? How did a soul not realize I was dead? Could it be he forgot? I'm just joking. Look at your face. So, you have a similar skill and repaired my soul? Thanks. Well, I had my reasons. You want my help to become a great musician? Day. Okay, okay. Put me back in the lyre and we can do that. Seth shoved Ounce back into the instrument and dunked it into the waters of Styx. Hey, whoa. What is this? It feels good. I could get used to hey. Hey. Don't just take me out, it was just getting good. Now, your soul shouldn't deteriorate over time. Seth mentioned and checked the lyre again. Lyre of Ounce. Unique ego. Durability, 666. 1 self-tuning. 2 self-repairing. 3 self-playing. 4 plus 75% proficiency gain in instrument mastery. 5 plus 100% effect of music skills. 6 ballads of Ounce. 7 hordes of Ounce. Made from the skull of Ounce, a well-known demon musician of his time. Often polarizing because of his hard take on music. Through mystical means, his soul was sealed in a lyre made of his own skull. Refurbished by the hands of craftsman Smith. Requirements: gain the recognition of Ounce. After repairing the souls, some of the options had improved quite a lot. And? What's your deal? Wanna be a great musician? A superstar? An artistic legend? I chose the class to complement my blacksmith class. That's unique. That's metal. I like it. I will help. And like that, Seth got the help of a very talkative ego liar. He didn't know whether this was a positive development. Chapter 393. Wait at the end of my work. In the next few days, Seth spent some more of his time practicing the lyre. Ounce was very talkative in general, but when it came to learning the lyre he was a great help. It was not just about the item's effects, but Ounce was a great teacher when it came to music. He could not only tell Seth what he did wrong but also immediately show him how to do it right. As the lyre was his body, he could demonstrate the faulty parts by playing them for Seth to see and repeat. The songs they were using were Ounce's. The ballads of Ounce were a true demonic bard's music with the purpose to support allies or sabotage opponents. Every time he practiced, people started gathering around to listen. Despite the demon language usually being rough on the ears of non-demons, when sung together with the full and otherworldly sounds of the magic lyre, it truly unfolded its demonic charm. Especially the chimeras, who had little knowledge of music, were enraptured by the new experience and became hardcore fans. Working with Ounce did not only level his instrument mastery, but also his singing and his demon language improved. The latter even upgraded to the level of mother tongue. Although working with the hyped demon lyre was tiresome, it helped Seth build up his foundations. In the meantime, Puffles gave Nico the blessing of Ivice. This was a trait similar to Seth's mark of Ivice. While Seth was stuck with the demon lyre, Nico Booze was dragged through the dungeons to get him to leave 50. This was double bad for the tailor, since he had no idea why he had to reach leave 50 before he was allowed to take the ancient class. It was a few days after the meeting with the princess and the arrival of Nadal's letter, that Alzalsar suddenly barged into the workshop. Seth was currently fiddling with a bunch of giant bones. Oh, Al. What's up? I heard you are going to use booze to make items with the sky silk. Yep. If you promise to give me a robe of sky silk after he became a craftsman, I will tell you a secret. I was going to give you one anyway, so tell me. You were going to find out anyway, sooner or later. Do you know why I insisted on having this vessel made? She suggestively gestured towards her scantily dressed body and curves. Wasn't it so you can stay at the red light district for as long as you wanted? Seth asked dryly. I won't deny it, but it was not the biggest reason. So, don't make it such a big secret. Tell me, if you want to tell me. Fine, unlike ordinary golems, yours can grow. What do you mean? I mean that unlike golems that are just moving things, or low-ranking undead who are cursed to be stagnant and never become stronger, they can naturally grow like any living beast or player. You have no idea how much I improved just by having a living body like his, compared to when I was a lich. Seth finally put the bone in his hands away and looked at her. This explained a lot. Cerberus would not need a strong soul or a powerful core if the golems could grow and level up like players or beasts. Even the most basic golems of Golem Artisan could become strong and effective if they grew by gaining experience. One could be inclined to think that Seth's work up to now was useless. But he knew that it was not. His predecessor had also worked on optimizing the golem's body. Sure, a simple golem could grow strong with time, but the more efficient the body was from the beginning, the quicker and greater the growth would be later on. The sorceress was right. At some point, Seth would have found out on his own. It was just that he had not done any real combat tests yet, with the golems. Should he just send the golems with the teams of the Oath Guard into the dungeons? No, he had a better idea. Recently the Chimeras had joined Mina's march. All of them became citizens of Delta, had joined the system. They could now safely raid dungeons to level the new classes and skills they gained. Unfortunately, the Chimeras had an underlying trauma of dark and tight spaces from the stronghold. This description fitted most dungeons. They had gotten used to traveling under the open sky. Seth had been thinking of sending them to explore the mountains in the direction of Y City. Actually, it was Mary's idea as a new business venture. To try and open a trade route to Y City. There were many big and untouched dungeons on the way that had been growing from the very beginning. They were one of the reasons the path between the cities was so dangerous and filled with monsters. Not only were the possible profits from the dungeons alluring, if they managed to clear and hold one of the modern routes, like a highway or even the maglev connection, they could take tolls from people to use it. Seth knew one thing very clearly, the system church would take a huge portion of profits if corporations really started using the teleport for trading. He knew it from experience. Mary was right. If Minas Mar was to give them a cheaper and safe alternative through land route, there would be a lot of money to be made. Nonetheless, this was an extremely dangerous endeavor and Seth had been unsure whether he was ready to send the Chimeras on such a perilous mission. He was worried that the Chimeras would sacrifice their lives for the mission if he gave them such a big task. They were rather naive at times. The Chimeras might even get angry if he asked them to be careful and put their own lives first. Instead of a big mission, he would send them to only explore and train the golems. This way they would not take any risks, since their goal would be to bring the golem back. It was a roundabout way to keep them safe and clear the mountains a little. Once they scouted the mountains, they would know the threat level and bring the field teams. Seth talked about this with the other, before they decided to go through with this. The Chimeras would not need to enter the dungeons, the golems would grow stronger, and they could work on slowly opening a trade route to Y City. Only getting the official permission was left. He wouldn't want to be treated as a mountain bandit or something after putting so much work into clearing the path. The chance had already arrived. The party the princess had mentioned. At that time, he could talk directly with the princess about this endeavor. Since the evaluation was around the corners, wouldn't she be open to unlocking new potential for Delta? However, money schemes, expeditions, and music recitals were not Seth's main focus. The golems he had made up until now were powerful, more powerful than they were in life. It was really cool, but this was just the first step. He was still missing a step, the most important step of why Al-Salzar, or Evie for that matter, was able to regenerate her flesh and blood body. Actually, he was pretty clear about the why. To create the body, two things were needed. Power and a set of instructions. A blueprint for the body, so to say. For Evie the power came from herself and her class. The blueprint part of her skill. For the golems of Golem Artisan, the power came from the soul and the blueprint was carved onto it using the spell arrays. For Al-Zalsar the power came similarly from herself, and according to her, the instructions were part of her ritual to become a lich. Giving a soul the power to regenerate a body was a consequence of how Seth's class works. Golem Artisan gave this consequence a direction. But a working body of flesh and blood was too complicated for him. What Seth was looking for was a way to get the instructions from the soul, so the original body could be restored like in Al's case. As long as he managed to generate the blueprint, he could compensate for lacking power using the magic crystals. He had kept thinking about it in the back of his mind when he got help from an unexpected direction. I have to say, you are thinking of this much too sterile and technical, my friend. Ounce suddenly told him during a practice session. What do you mean, did I misplay? No. No, you did not misplay. I am talking about the thing that has been distracting you the whole time. The golems? Yeah, the whole soul business. I am a demon, so trust me when I tell you, that you at looking at souls, too much like an engineer. Trust the demon with souls? Listen to me and stop joking around. By nature, souls don't always follow the rules of logic. You have been influenced a lot by the way of your predecessor and the knowledge of that lich. And what are you saying I should do? You are a musician. Be more creative. Souls are life, even as remnants. Life always has desires and with desires come demands. Ask them what they want. Make them ask what they want. Make them desire something to ask for and they will tell you what you need in exchange for it. You can't mean. Are you serious? Yes. Get them pumped up and see where it leads you to. Of course, I will help. Chapter 394. The Hustle. Unfortunately, he had no chance to follow this line of thought. Today was the day of the party, that Princess Lena had talked about. He had promised to come and needed to get ready for the event. Are you ready? Mina asked after he got dressed. The moment he saw Mina in her drop-dead gorgeous dress, he didn't regret having to leave his workshop anymore. She wore a rather revealing black dress with slits that gave a view of her long legs, a deep cleavage, and an open back. The venue was a wide ballroom at the princess residence. Everyone wore fine evening attire. A piece of calm music was playing in the background as people stood around and talked. Seth's entourage only consisted of 4 people. It was obvious that Mina came along, and the princess demanded the presence of Finn. Most of his friends gladly skipped the event to stay at the tower and do their own things. The surprising additions that wanted to come along were Lydia and Mike, who joined them at the location. The cybergoth in a regal evening dress was already an unusual sight. Seeing the handsome and confident beastman, looking awkward and uncomfortable in a suit, made it hard for Seth not to smile. Mike kept blushing and looking away. From the way he was chained down by her interlocked elbow, it was clear whose idea it was to join tonight. Lydia on the other side smiled brightly and ignored her partner's struggles. "HOH, Lydia, did you fish yourself a cat boy?" he teased. "I had a great role model," she hinted at Mina at Seth's side. "I knew you were a person of culture," he praised. "I couldn't help it." While the people of culture were talking, Mina and Mike didn't really know what was going on but tried their best to pretend not to know them. Despite holding hands with these people. "Mao, stop talking couple talk when Finn is alone here." Finn's voice sounded from Seth's shoulder. The tiny fairy wore a tiny dress. "What do you, aren't you here with me?" "No. You are here with Mina. Finn is alone. Can't I be here with both of you? Then promise to dance with Finn." Seth started sweating. Dancing? The problem was that he didn't know how to dance. He was originally terrible at singing, this lack of talent extended to dancing. Every time he had tried to dance would end in disaster. Seth has already been a mess of destruction before the apocalypse. Just what kind of damage would he cause, when he started to dance now with all his levels and buffs? He looked at the big dark eyes of the fairy, that were stabbing him with expectations. He glanced at Mina. If he danced with Finn, he would also have to dance with Mina. The woman at his side actually winked at him as if she had understood his worries. She squeezed his hand and leaned over to whisper in his ear. "Don't worry about me. The only dance I expect of you is the mattress tango," she breathed with a raunchy smile. Fine, she had asked for it. Assured that the disaster would only happen once, he washed his hands off all responsibilities for the damage he would cause. "Okay, let's dance later," he agreed to the fairy brute, setting off a squeaky scream of joy. The fairy shot off after securing his promise. Until the dancing started, she would do her own thing. Seth felt dark clouds rising in the buffet's immediate future. He knew restraint, Finn knew what it was but decided to ignore it. The only people in the room Seth really knew aside from his friends were Elsa, Marcel, Brock, and the princess. The other person he knew about was the mist demon from the tournament. The others were all strangers. 2 corners of the ballroom were occupied by a dark figure each. One was the brooding silhouette of a tall man with broad shoulders, the other was smaller and seemed to belong to a woman. Both hid their faces using a hood. In a group of 3, there was a somewhat short young woman with short black hair and a tomboyish aura, an older, elegant gentleman with graying hair and an impressive mustache, and Brock. They were already talking quite friendly with each other. On the side, there was a beautiful woman sitting alone at one of the tables. Her almost sickly pale skin and pale blonde hair gave her an ethereal beauty. Her white evening dress was hard at work, keeping her voluptuous chest at bay. She wasn't Seth's type, but he could appreciate a good view. Mina at his side followed his gaze, and appreciated the good view, too. The woman was just taking a sip of her drink when the tranquil scenery was disturbed by the approach of a handsome lad with slicked back hair. He smiled amicably and enthusiastically started talking to the silent beauty. She did not talk back but also did not shoo him away. He needed high social skills to keep his confidence when facing his aloof and unbudging belle. There were more people in the room, but those were the ones he recognized from the meeting. "Seth." Marcel greeted them as he and Elsa approached. Seth waved at him and introduced them to Mina and the others. "Lydia Willis? From the Willis family?" Elsa asked curiously. "The last of my kind," she answered in playful drama which actually managed to make the cold beauty laugh. Seth talked a while longer with Marcel before he took aim at the princess, who had been busy with official-looking people until now. On his way, he was intercepted by the small woman that had been talking with Brock and the gentleman until now. She had a tanned baby face with a quirky smile and a spark of curiosity in her dark eyes. "Did I hear that right? Are you the Tower Master of Minas Mar?" Is it true that you are the one who made all the cool weapons at the turquoise anvil? Does it mean you are a blacksmith? She assaulted him with rapid-fire questions. Seth was stumped for a moment. His thoughts had already been at the talk with the princess, and he needed a moment to change tracks and react. In the meantime, the other had already changed target. Are you Mina? The assassin from Minas Mar? I heard a lot about you. It's so cool to meet a real cat person. Are you in the Tower Master? Okay, halt. How about you introduce yourself for starters? Seth interrupted her. She looked surprised and smacked her own forehead. Hi. I'm Ellen Culpepper, you can call me Ellie. Hi, Ellie. Seth and Mina said with a smile before introducing themselves. I heard from the princess, that we could buy equipment from you. Will you join the expedition as a blacksmith? She asked excitedly with her sparkling eyes. No, I am joining with my second class, as a bard. And you? Wow, you already have your second class. I'm still deliberating about it. My primary class is Slime Rancher. It's a super cool rare class and I can tame and breed all kinds of cute slimes. Cute? The slimes Seth remembered were far from cute, but there were all kinds of tastes. Who was he to judge? But then she pulled out an round, sparkly jelly ball. See? Isn't he cute? It was indeed cute, unlike most slimes he had ever seen in a dungeon. I was much more along the lines of slimes in comics. A wobbly, translucent drop with a core floating inside. This specific one had a light pink hue. This one is Humboldt. He was my first one and evolved quite a few times. Oh, wow. He really is cute. Mina exclaimed and could barely hold back from snatching it out of Ellie's hand. The girl smiled self-satisfied when bragging about Humboldt and her nose rose to the heavens. But look this one. Mina suddenly said and brought out a Gomini. Ellie's jaw dropped, faced with the tiny, chubby golem. Oh my god, what is this cute, little abomination, the slime girl called out. That's not all. Mina rose the stakes and put Gomini down to have him walk around and do tricks. Humboldt will not lose. Ellie also put Humboldt down and had him perform tricks. What was this sudden competitiveness? And why did you bring out Gomini? Seth couldn't quite follow what was going on. Seth made Gomini? See, can I have one, too? She looked at him with puppy eyes. He tried to evade the piercing lights. Don't you have Humboldt? This and that are two completely different things. I have enough love to share it, she said with a confident fist pump and stars in her eyes. Fine, I will give you one. Seth was weak against this kind of hyped up and expectant changes. In the end, was it not because she appreciated his work? Yes, it was not a weakness, just reciprocating her awe of him. Yay, you are a lot nicer than that slave mancer guy. Just a lot of empty talk and bragging. And more handsome, especially the last part was said loud enough that it could be heard by the person in question. Following Ellie's mischievous gaze, they saw the handsome young man with slicked back hair lift his head. He had been holding a one-sided dialogue to the pale woman at the table but halted his monologue when his name fell. Or maybe because his handsomeness was called into question. A slave mancer? Yeah, just wait and he will probably tell you all about it. Or rather, he will tell Mina all about it. Until that lady came, he had been talking to me about his class without end. The old men Brock and Cadden saved me from his unending monologue. It means something when even you didn't get a word in, Seth commented. Ellie smiled mischievously. Right? It's what I'm telling you. Hey, don't talk like that about Rich like that. It's not nice. A young girl, barely 15, suddenly spoke up to them. She looked like a small animal and her high-pitched voice shook slightly when she spoke up against them. Seth had noticed her watching the golem and slime with sparkling eyes from close by before. I'm just telling the truth, though. Ellie answered innocently. Still, Rich is a good guy and it's not nice to talk behind his back. Margaret, what are you doing? An older woman, maybe in her late 30s, followed behind her. They both wore simple dresses in muted colors. Seth noticed that they were not items with any effects, like most clothes in Delta were at this time, but really just ordinary dresses. She talked bad about Rich, the girl said and pointed at Ellie. Don't point at people, Margaret, the woman scolded and put down the girl's hand. I only said that he likes to brag about himself, and Seth is more handsome, the slime girl answered in a rightful with a hand above her heart. The woman smiled awkwardly. Please excuse her, she is still a child. She doesn't understand everything, and she is a little overprotective when it comes to the master. The woman apologized and brought the girl away. Seth felt a little sorry for her. She had seemed quite enticed by Gamini and humbled. Chapter 395. Foot loss. A short, awkward silence followed after the pair walked away before Ellie brought out another slime and the girls returned to gushing about Gamini and the slimes. Seth took the chance to finally approach Lena. Tower Master. Where's Finn? She greeted him and asked, disappointed when she could not see her guest of honor. She already ran off. Seth vaguely gestured in the direction of the buffet. I see. Did you already meet the other participants? I met Ellie, the slime rancher, he said with a smile. And what do you think? She's interesting, I guess. I was talking about providing equipment. I don't think I have a lot for her. Minasmar has only one tamer and Evan took most of the items I made that have worth for a tamer or summoner. She sighed. Can't you just make some for her? I have a good idea. How about you listen to my proposition first? Oh, what is it? Seth described Minasmar's plan to open a trade route to Y City towards the southeast. He did not go into the details about the forces he would use to do so. What do you think? It's interesting, I guess, she answered with a humored smile. Mirroring his earlier tone. Childish. Finn suddenly commented from the side. Finn. Weren't you at the buffet? The princess asked, shocked and blushed furiously. She gave Seth a wronged look as if he had tricked her. I didn't think my lady would be this childish. Finn said in plain disappointment, piercing Lena's heart. No, Finn, listen. With the fairy brute as the wingman, they soon came to an agreement concerning the trade route. Mary would contact her later to sort out the details. In exchange, Seth promised to take making personalized items for the participants into consideration. He didn't mind equipping Brock, Elsa, Marcel, to begin with. Ellie seemed like a good girl, too. As for the others? He could sell them stuff from the storage, but whether he would waste his time making something for them was uncertain. He left Finn with the princess and returned to Mina. He soon realized his mistake and regretted leaving the fairy alone with the princess. Lena entered the stage. Since everyone is here, I would like to direct some words to everyone. With a short speech, the banquet was officially started, and the dance floor was opened. This had to be the work of Finn. It had been less than 5 minutes since he left her with the princess. There was no way that Fairy Geek would let go of Finn this easily. He was a terrible dancer, but a promise was a promise. At least he could not step on the fairy's feet, since she would be flying. Finn was already waiting on the dance floor. A small weight fell off Seth's heart when he heard that the music was modern club music and not something classical. He had even less knowledge of classical dance than of dancing in a club. With awkward and non-specified dance moves he closed in on the fairy who was waiting on him. He noticed that his dancing had vastly improved since he made music and trained in fighting. He only bumped into a few people on the way. You came. I promised, didn't I? Even if I will probably embarrass myself, he said as his limbs flailed uncoordinatedly to the music. No worries, Finn will take the lead. He didn't know what she was trying to say until he saw her take out a golden ring. Where did you get that, Finn? Wait. It was too late, she had already put on the ring made of arcane gold. It was one of the experiments Seth had done earlier, using the gigantification enchantments of the craftsman tier. A normal person could turn into a 3-meter tall Hulk. However, the enchantment used a lot of magic and was a little unstable. I found it in the workshop. Now, Finn and Seth can dance. No, she exclaimed in dismay when Seth still towered over her like a giant. Finn had grown, to the size of an elementary schooler. Oh, Finn. Seth couldn't help but chuckle, seeing the child-sized Finn grumble as her plan failed. It seems that she had not tested it before. Tears started welling up in the fairy's big, black eyes. There. It's okay, Finn. We can just dance like this. But I wanted to, and I'm too heavy to fly now. Gamini? Humboldt? This was the cutest thing this evening. He hugged her tightly and lifted her up. You tried really hard. Finn did. It's okay, Finn. Just talk normally with me. You knew. Oh please. You think your cute act is perfect? I watched you get dead drunk and fleece demons in gambling, he teased her. Let's just dance and have fun. No matter how embarrassing it is, the last part, he only said in his mind. Okay. The act was awkward, and people soon started evading the weird dance couple, as Seth bumped into people. Before people formed a safety perimeter around them, he broke more than 1 foot. However, Finn and Seth started having fun. Once the fairy returned to her original size, she would fly in front of him, as they exchanged weird original dance moves. Off the dance floor. I did not expect him to be such a wacky person, Ellie spoke to Mina as they watched the two let loose. He's like that at times. You are not much better. I think it's good if people can keep such aside, despite the kind of world we live in. Mina smiled and didn't let Seth out of her eyes. Seeing Finn grow like that, gave the Catwoman a few ideas. If Seth perfected that kind of ring, she thought, and licked her lips. You are thinking something lewd, Ellie said with a grin. No, I don't, shut up, she said with a mischievous smile. Their happy mood was rudely interrupted by someone else's conversation. Mina's sensitive cat ears easily listened in on their talk. This guy is supposed to be more handsome than rich. He is good looking, but dancing like an idiot is definitely a red flag. Yeah, what's the point of a nice face, if you embarrass yourself like this? Look at Rich, how elegantly he dances. If not for the loony pair, all eyes would be on him. A group of women was whispering and pointing at Seth. Ellie saw the cat assassin's eyes sharpen and followed the gaze to the group of women. Although she had not Seth's appraisal eyes, she could recognize the simple dresses that lacked any system amplifications. The Slavemancer's harpies. The slime rancher did not like the handsome lad with slicked back hair. He had not wronged her, but his pushy behavior, bragging and trying to recruit her as a slave had seriously rubbed her the wrong way. Especially, the last part. It did not help that the people, guys and girls, in his entourage were seriously enraptured with the guy for no apparent reason. Mina's intent gaze did not stay unnoticed and one of the young women came closer. What are you looking at, with those scary eyes, hey? Do you think you are special or cute with those cat ears? Despite the nice dress, she looked rough with many scars revealed by the dress. It seemed that she was used to fighting and intimidating people, even before the apocalypse. What am I looking at? A bunch of brainless corpses, she said, and her killing intent brushed over the thug-like woman. The woman's eyes widened in fear. She tried to speak, or scream, but it was stuck in her throat. She kneeled down under the pressure as visions of death filled her mind. The killing intent of an assassin close to level 70 was nothing to laugh at. Mina retracted her killing intent after a few seconds. What was only a moment had felt like hours to the woman. She was drenched in sweat and breathing heavily. Her eyes were filled with fear when she looked up at Mina, who looked as if nothing happened at all. What did you do to her? Her compatriots came rushing over. Mina did not answer and only lifted an eyebrow, acting innocently. Ellie only thought for a moment before stepping up. Gamini is cute. Cat ears are cute. Finn is cute. Cuteness is justice. She chose her side. What are you even talking about in a situation like this? Your friend suddenly had a panic attack, and your first reaction is blaming others? You should get her to a calm room or something, the slime rancher said righteously. Aren't you that rude slime girl that flipped Rich off? One suddenly recognized her. Ah! Aren't you the woman that came with the loony on the dance floor? Another remembered Mina. I see. You heard us. Is this your retribution for making fun of your boyfriend? A third suddenly spoke with venom dripping from her tongue. A shower ran down the women's spines when Mina used the assassin's version of observation on them, which made them feel like facing a predator. One had to admit that they were not low-level with an average of level 50. However, it was far from enough to face the almost 20 levels higher Mina. They felt the difference as the appraisal skill revealed all their secrets. This is not over yet, the third-rate mob character dropped a cliché line before the women picked up their rude friend and ran off. Chapter 396. The Twist. Sometime later, Seth and Finn grouped back up with Mina and Ellie. Lydia and Mike were sitting together with Elsa and Marcel, absorbed in conversation. Did something happen? Did I embarrass you, Mina? I'm sorry, he laughed it off and begged for mercy. How could you embarrass me? I just taught some people a lesson. She was just telling Seth what happened when a huffy lad suddenly approached. Slicked back hair, soft, handsome face. It was Rich, the slave mancer, and he looked angry. Though, it was hard to tell, since his features were distorted by rage, had literally zero intimidation factor. What did you do to Sarah? He spat out, barely able to contain his rage. It was like watching an angry little dog bark. One of those ugly ones, celebrities put in their handbag. The one called Sarah had slightly recovered and came up behind Rich, propped up by one of her friends. It was her, she pointed at Mina dramatically. How could you scare her like that? Rich immediately started blaming the girl beside Seth. Mina did nothing wrong. If anything, she went too light on them. Finn intercepted before Seth could speak up. Be happy that Finn did not hear you. Finn would have crushed you to dust, the tiny brute's killing intent had an almost corporeal intensity. However, unless one knew what she was capable of, she had the same intimidation factor as Rich. Finn, calm down. It seems like there is a misunderstanding. Mina only reacted to the rude provocation of your friend. Seth explained calmly with an amicable smile. He had trusted the effects of Persephone's blessing, to solve the problem peacefully. I heard it differently and I trust my teammates, he said stubbornly. It seemed like the other was too blind to recognize an olive branch unless he was beaten with it in the face. And I know for a fact, that Mina doesn't have a habit of bullying weaklings. Now, what will you do? I will complain to the princess. Go ahead. She can vouch for Mina's personality just as well as me. And Finn. Rich became a little insecure and looked back at Sarah, who could not help but avoid his eyes, tacitly admitting she was not completely honest. Rich let out a deep sigh and his fists unclenched. I'm sorry for causing trouble, he apologized and lowered his head. The rage had vanished like smoke in the wind. Could we maybe start over and forget something stupid like this happened? Seth looked at Mina, who simply shrugged. She had gotten angry on his behalf. It was his decision. Sure, don't worry about it, he slapped Rich's shoulder a few times with a smile. Really? Water under the bridge? It's not like really anything happened. You have more substance than I thought. It's a shame that it's so hard to see behind all the bragging and babbling. Ellie commented. She did not further specify which of them she meant. I saw you dancing. It's very unique, the slave mancer tried to keep the conversation going. You can just call it horrible. I don't mind. I'm better in playing music than in dancing to it. Really? Oh, right. You mentioned that you were taking part as a bard. I actually thought you were joking. Hey, can you play something for us? The slime rancher commented with a chuckle. Haha, maybe later. This way they got into a conversation. They sat down and talked for a while. Just like Ellie had prophesied, the slave mancer told them about himself, but in a more humble manner. Rich was originally from Gamma, where he led a group of survivors. His epic class gave him extremely powerful passive and active support skills for allies. He could even revive people under certain conditions. Allies in this context meant slaves. At this point Rich hurriedly explained that he was not a person who enjoyed this, it was just that his class worked like this. To make someone his slave, the other had to sign a contract. Rich could freely set the conditions for these contracts, so they were often more like a limited mercenary contract than a real slave contract. At this point, it was just a prerequisite to receiving his support skills and no constraint to the one signing it. He complained quite a bit about how hard it was to fight against the stigma of his class description. As a slave mancer, he had no party limit, so at one point he had a group of almost 200 people fighting alongside him. They were resisting the Undead Empire when the Krana Empire came to Gamma. After their truce, he was scouted by the princess in Gamma to come along and protect the first wave of refugees. Although it was less annoying than Ellie described it, Rich really liked to talk a lot, especially about himself. But when he finished, the conversation slowly turned to the others on the table, such as Seth. Then, you are the blacksmith Lady Lena talked about, he suddenly asked warily. It seems like the princess told everyone about our little deal. That was not really how I meant it, but... Oh well, it's okay, since we didn't mention not telling you guys beforehand. Yes, I can supply equipment and can certain arrangements to help. So, how did I do? Because, you know, it's like this. Our funds, my funds are a little, almost non-existent, he finally admitted, embarrassed. Despite having a lot of people, they never had a lot of chances to raid dungeons. Most of their current equipment was scavenged from the undead. It was not great from the start, but after the long journey, it was rather shabby. The slave mancer had been able to make up for the lack of equipment with his support skills, but they were at the bottom of the barrel now. After arriving, the group of 50 that came along with him disbanded, leaving him with only 15 loyal people. Only 7 of them were ready to fight. Even after they repaired their current equipment, it was far from enough to visit dungeons appropriate for their levels. They quickly realized that rich alone was not enough to make up for the lacking equipment and party balance in and leave 50 dungeon. They were almost broke. It had already been a big expense to buy cheap evening attire for everyone. Seth saw the anguish on the slavemancer's face when he had to admit his inability to care for his comrades. He mused about it for a moment. How about you come to our guild building tomorrow? I will talk with the head of administration. There are still about 3 months until we depart. I'm sure we can come up with a financing plan for you. Seth wanted to help them, but he also thought about the irony of binding a slave-mancer with a debt contract. No matter his intention, Rich's face lit up in joy and he thanked the blacksmith profusely. He was not just an expert in bragging, but also in bootlicking. He knew that he had no small ego, but even Seth found it off-putting and hurriedly found a way to send him away. That's quite the character, Mina commented. Quite the talker, yet. You aren't thinking about scouting him for Mina's Mar? Hell no. Good, she said relieved. How about me? Ellie suddenly chirped from the side. Her eyes shone like floodlights as she stared at Seth. What do you mean? Joining Mina's Mar or getting equipment? Both. I don't mind giving you a discount, but I'm not sure about letting you join. I'm in favor. Mina suddenly said. Why? Seth didn't know enough about Ellie, but Mina took him to the side and started whispering in his ear. It was not just that she got along with her, but Ellie also had a reputation. During the chaos in Delta, after the abduction at the tournament, the slime rancher had made a name for herself when fighting the random monster invasions around the city. As a single person, she was the biggest contributor aside from Mina's Mar and other big guilds during this time. There were stories of her taking care of some monster invasion alone before reinforcement could even arrive. The slimes she reared had a huge variation and many of them were specialized for all kinds of combat situations. Ellie waited patiently at the table as Mina briefed him on her information. Aside from everything Mina said, Seth remembered something else. When he had just returned to Earth, he had met an oozer. The ooze it had dropped was good material for the acids used in demonic inscriptions. What if her slimes could produce similar variations of that? What kind of inks would Allison be able to make from those? There were all kinds of inks out there, that could be bought, but it would be a lot more convenient if a huge number of different inks could be made in-house. Welcome to Mina's Mar, he said to the slime rancher, after sitting down. Chapter 397. Freestyler. Does that mean I get equipment for free? Once you sign the contract, you can get a set of oath armor. As for other stuff, you can get a discount, but it's not free. There were only 2 people in the evaluation team he felt comfortable gifting some stuff. Marcel and Elsa had really helped him a lot when they took responsibility as leaders in the caravan. He was thankful and felt a little guilty about pushing all that work onto them. So, I get some free stuff. That's cool. Don't forget my minigal, too. Yet. Oh, right. Will you play something for us now? Ellie suddenly pinned him down by reminding him of his promise. Yes. Finn wants to dance to Seth's music. Are you sure? I don't want to disturb the party by hijacking the stage. Leave it to Finn. A moment later the fairy returned with the princess on her heels. Finn said you wanted to play a song. I already informed the DJ. Please hurry and get on the stage, so I can dance with Finn. Lena urged the bard. He looked at Finn in shock, but the little brute only answered with a big grin from ear to ear. There was no way he could get out of this now, so he accepted his fate and climbed on the stage. Oh. Our first actual audience. What do you want to play? Seth smirked when he spotted Finn in the crowd below. Let's go with Fairies Wear Gauntlets. This was one of the songs Ounce had taught him. Hey, guys. I'm Seth, an aspiring bard. I promised to play a little bit, so please be lenient with your judgment. Using his voice amplified by voice of Seth, he greeted the audience before placing his hands on the strings of his instrument. The song started with a slow solo of the lyre. The otherworldly tunes of the skull lyre filled the hall. It was vastly different from the pop music that had been playing until now and anything most people knew for that fact. Dark tones, suffused with magic, made it hard to look away or stay still. Like a dark substance that sneakily soaked into their bodies. It was the unique effect of a demon bard's music. It was a good song, to get the people used to the influence of the demonic vibes. And surprise what? I saw a fairy with gauntlets beating a dwarf. Seth started to sing, his chant amplified by Orpheus' voice, and voice of Seth did the same to their minds. Although few in the audience understood demon language, the text would enter their head and paint the picture of the lyrics in their mind. Ding! You have enraptured 50 people with your music. Purse +1. Seth heard the announcement in surprise. He didn't know there were such achievements for musicians. But he didn't care, he looked at the audience and they just stood there and listened. This wasn't what he wanted. Finn wanted to dance. Let them dance. The music changed with the next song, as the notes he played became darker and faster. With his intention, changed the effect and the crowd started to move. Ounce gave him the lines and Seth threw them in the crowd, watching the crowd of people in fine evening dresses devolve in a mess of raving bodies, dancing wildly to his hypnotic tunes. It was Seth's first glimpse at the power of music. He had entered a trance where he kept singing and playing, without really thinking about it. She watched the man, the princess had told her about, suddenly entering the stage. He was a bard? I thought he was a blacksmith, she thought to herself. When he started playing, unworldly music filled the hall. She could feel the music creeping in her mind and heart, but there was no harm. She immersed herself in this alien feeling and listened in silence. Soon the song slowly came to an end, and she looked up to the stage. The bard seemed not satisfied, and suddenly, from the end of the first song, there was a fluid transition into the next. The change was tremendous. Compared to now, the power before was calm. The seeping tentacles of sound now compelled her to move. To follow her instincts and move to the rhythm. She already felt her fangs and nails growing as a golden glow shone from her eyes, when Heart of Steel shooed away the power of music. She gasped for air when the effects were gone. Just what was that? She looked around and the only others resisting the music was the guy leaning in the opposite corner, the pale lady, and the old man with the impressive mustache. Though some seemed to willingly go along with the music, instead of being forced. The whole crowd wildly danced in euphoria. And they were compelled to dance until the bard finally ended his performance. This guy is special. I mean, the music is strong, but not that. He had the smell of several different gods but not the aura of a champion. What does that mean? That is the question. You should try to approach him. Ha! I was going to anyway. I think he's the blacksmith who can give us items. Good, good. I will go back to rest. She let out a long sigh and stared listlessly in the distance with a bored expression. It had been a year since she had to endure this voice in her head. Of course, she was grateful that her class enabled her to survive, but why did it have to be the god of repose and stagnation? Taking on the fragments of the fallen god had a radical influence on her mood. Which meant she was bored most of the time. It was a heavy loss for someone who used to be loud and energetic. Now, not even the powerful music could move her heart against the power of the god. She would often think back to that day. When she was chased by monsters outside the city and suddenly broke through the floor into an ancient ruin. There she had met her new god and became his saintess. Once I have regained some of my power, I can regain my ethereal body. Then you won't bear this burden. Was what Samhatch had promised her back then. Now, as his saintess, she had to somehow spread his religion, which was hard, when you're bored and unmotivated all the time. He kept going until his throat was sore. Ding! You made over 50 people dance to exhaustion. +1 purse. The message broke the trance. Only then did he realize what he had done and hurriedly stopped playing. The whole time, people had kept dancing in the hall. They were drenched in sweat, and some were completely exhausted. Only a small number of people were okay or had resisted his music. What just happened? He mumbled, trying to understand. You, my friend, found enlightenment. Enlighten. It was true, he felt like his mind had cleared back there and he had gotten a deeper understanding of music. Looking at his skills, his singing had become adept LV.7. Orpheus' voice and voice of Seth had leveled up to Leave 7 and Leave 5 respectively. And his instrument mastery shot straight to Leave 9 on the cusp of upgrading to adept. Aside from his skill, he had a lot to think about. But first, he had to resolve the situation. He sneakily equipped the golden fleece below his suit, to have it cast a healing spell for his throat. Arim, this concludes my performance. Thanks for listening. Seth put away Ounce and got off the stage. Seth felt a little guilty. He had not wanted to cause this kind of incident. He just wanted to give Finn and the princess to dance some more. However, his guilty conscience vanished when he heard the claps of the crowd. Despite their exhaustion, they started clapping. I have never danced like this. It's been ages since music touched me like this. It was new and strange. Mina caught his elbow and hugged his arm. She was a little sweaty, but far from exhausted. You never sang like that in Mina's march. It was really fun. The princess approached him with Finn on her shoulder. It seemed that they had more than enough chances to dance with each other. I had my doubts when you said that you would join as a bard. But if this is the kind of effect you can cause with pure music, I'm looking forward to your performance. Thanks, I guess. Seth said, unsure, but with a smile. They met up with Lydia, Mike, Marcel, and Elsa and sat together at a table. Like Mina, they were sweaty, but not exhausted. They had fun, going along with his music and dance unfettered by traditional dances. May I sit here? An ethereal voice asked, not much louder than a whisper. It was the sickly pale blonde they had seen when entering. She was one of the few who had not budged when the music played. Chapter 398 YMCA. My name is Yvette Marlowe, I'm coming along as a priestess, she spoke in a serene voice, after taking a seat. Sitting at their table she complimented Seth on his earlier performance. As they spoke, her expression almost never changed. It was an almost bored look, with her eyes half closed as if about to fall asleep, a light but attractive smile on her face. Overall, she gave the impression of someone who was divorced from reality. She knew what kind of impression her appearance had on others, to the point she even apologized. Please excuse my lack of expression. Because of a certain condition concerning my class, I have a hard time feeling emotions as I used to. It was the only time when a slight melancholy shone in her eyes. They made mostly small talk and Yvette hurriedly left soon afterward, saying she just wanted to introduce herself. Seth knew that she probably wanted to leave a good impression on this chance, though he didn't know why she suddenly had to leave. Maybe she felt awkward since everyone on the table were people already acquainted with each other. Seth could understand that she might feel awkward invading their conversation like this. He related to that. He would make sure to tell Jan to give her a discount if she visited the shop sometime later. Give me a moment, I have to go to the bathroom, Mina announced and stood up. Promptly, Ellie, Elsa, and Finn joined her on her toilet quest. Well, I will use this chance to visit the porcelain throne, too. Seth excused himself. Bigger business waited for Seth, and he spent some time reigning on the porcelain throne, playing with his phone. When he finished up and left, he faced a dark figure standing in the corner beside the sink. Washing his hands at a sink, one away from the shadow, he suddenly spoke. You know this is the men's toilet, right? Could you go to the side, please? You are blocking the hand dryer. Thank you. Are you? She started in a dark female voice. Obviously, trying to sound more intimidating. The guy with the weapons? No, he finished and answered the question. What? But the princess, she suddenly exclaimed in a distinctively higher and more normal voice. Just joking. Being asked the same question the whole evening gets a little old. The princess shouldn't have informed you people about getting a discount. If you wanted to speak to me, you could have just approached me, instead of waiting on the toilet while I do business. I couldn't. It's not about the equipment for the excursion. She stated and brought out a rough, square piece of golden metal. Where did you get that? Seth asked in surprise, seeing the space beacon core Evie had made. It was still brimming with the energy of the champion's soul. However, the intricate formations engraved on it had become distorted and molten, making it unusable. From the princess. It's about the soul bound in this piece of metal. Did you make this? Hearing her talk about the soul, Seth stared into the shadow under the hood. It was a very unassuming female face. Not ugly, but also not beautiful, and easily forgettable. But after just a moment this face vanished, and he looked into a pair of golden eyes, a handsome woman's face with small vampire fangs sticking out over her lips. It was the effect of eyes of Argus, to see through illusions. Can you see it with those golden eyes? He asked, passively admitting that he was responsible for it. It was her turn to look up in surprise. She seemed to have judged that there was no point in hiding the fact. Yes, but not good enough to easily follow the tethers. Can you make me an item that allows me to hunt down the leftover Zarkists? It was the first time she looked him directly in the eyes and he could see a fire burning in those amber-like eyes. Seth pursed his lips and looked her up and down in suspicion. Under the robe she wore the alloy armor Seth had seen on the troops from Y City. I can pay. Fine. Give it. I will see what I can do. When do you think it will be done? I wanted to eradicate the leftovers, before the evaluation. I will see what I can do. What's your name? He asked while tucking away the plate in his inventory. Cade. Cade Albright. Looking at her serious expression and appearance shrouded in darkness, he found that name quite ironic. Okay, Cade. Next time, visit my shop or our guild building. We will have a problem if you ambush me in the men's room again. Oh, and don't try to disguise your voice. Not very impressive. With that he stepped out of the toilette, intending for a cool exit, but encountered the group of Mina and the others outside. Through the door behind Seth, they could see Cade leaning against the wall. What's a girl doing in the men's toilet? Elsa asked surprised. Did Seth do something naughty? Ellie asked jokingly. Mina didn't say anything, instead, she stepped past Seth and stared into the shadow of Cade's hood before the girl could react. Then she scrutinized her curves expertly. Her face is a little plain, but she has a nice body. If you insist, I will approve of letting her join the Beast Woman, gave her verdict. It's not like that. Seth exclaimed, which was answered by Mina's bell-like laughter. I know. Still. Come on, stop it now. Fine. After his cool exit was ruined, Seth could only do his best to endure the girls' teasing and bowl them away from there. It was quite embarrassing, to have his cool act exposed, right after critiquing that of someone else. What just happened? Cade thought to herself as the door closed, leaving her standing alone in the dark man's toilet. She had spent a long time alone, but was this how people had usually acted? She could only hope the blacksmith would do his work. Feeling unsure whether that was the right thing to do or not, she did not want to return to the party. Cade returned to her room that was provided by the princess. All people the princess had recruited in Gamma, and brought to Delta, were provided with a room to stay for the time being. She just hoped not to meet the other residents on the way. She didn't like the annoying slave Mansa and his crew, but the other guy was a whole other level of annoying. Always going on and on about his weird responsibility and trying to talk others into stuff. As the party came to its end, Brock and the old man approached them just before they left. It was just a brief introduction. The man introduced himself as Albert and his class was a dimensional merchant. Essentially, he was like Seth, he had a non-combat class but was able to gain strength through his unique class, which gave him access to an interdimensional trading system. As he himself had no problems getting his hands on equipment and supplies he needed, their talk was a simple exchange of pleasantries. The blacksmith briefly thought about the option of buying exotic equipment or ores from the man, but he didn't really like the idea. Since Albert was the only one with access to and knowledge of the prices, he could ask whatever he wanted for stuff. Seth was rich, but it didn't mean he would willingly get taken advantage of. But if he was able to provide materials at a cheaper price than the auction house, there might be some worth. That's why Seth took part in vague talks about possible future collaborations. In the end, Seth did not get the chance to meet the other last member that had stood in the corner of the ballroom before they left. Since they didn't approach him, they probably had no problems with their equipment. He didn't really care. He had learned quite a bit on this evening and had a lot on his mind. He had gained a kind of enlightenment on music and had to sort his thought. On top of that, the soul of Zarkan's champion had found its way back to him. Together with the person that it was destined for. Back then, he had an intuition that it was better not to keep the soul as if it was meant for someone else. Through the princess, it had found its way into the right hands. A girl set on destroying all remnants of Zarkan? Keeping the soul? He didn't want to. Despite the uniqueness of the soul, the possible effects and its original owner were too off-putting for him. The only thing he hoped to get back was the whimsical curse. Cade was no champion. Seth was sure that she would destroy the soul once her work was done. At that point, he could get the necklace back. After all this time, it would have powered up tremendously. His head full of thoughts, they finally returned home. Chapter 399. Soul Music. Using music to manipulate the soul and bring out the desires and instincts, to be used as the blueprint for the body. Ounce was right, Seth would not have come to this conclusion on his own before the party. He had kept looking at it from the perspective of a blacksmith. Music and the skills of an infernal skald were something he had thought of as an add-on for later. He realized now that he had been wrong. There may be many approaches that could work, but this one might be the best one for him. With Ounce's input, his research took a new turn. And he had been delivered a convenient test subject. The living soul of the champion of a god that was known to unleash the desires of his believers. People often said that music could touch the soul. Seth had thought it was just a proverb until his enlightenment. Ounce had insisted on it from the start. The infernal skald soon found out why it was so clear for Ounce. Demons had always dealt with souls, more than most other races. Seth found quite a few books at the library of the college to help with his work. He did not have to do all the work himself. There existed many songs that were meant to directly manipulate the soul. These were mostly songs he had never bothered to look at, as they were meant for entertainment. Again, he found his horizons had been too narrow. He had looked for ballads to forge and songs to support, even those to attack like Soul Shock. But he never cared to look for those to entertain. These often had a profound effect to evoke even stronger emotion by touching the listener's soul. Using the soul of the champion of Zarkon, he was able to study the effects on a soul and the resulting reactions. According to Ounce, a living soul would give the best results. Just like how undead lacked a wide range of strong emotions, the souls, or rather the remnants of souls Seth used, often lacked strong emotions. To develop the needed spell array, it was easier to use this soul at first, which gave stronger reactions. Although Kate had sounded urgent with her request, he could only feel sorry for putting his own matters first. But he had already finished the item she wanted, he just needed to put in the soul. Once he was done, he could finish it and immediately contact her. "Hey, Seth," someone approached him in his workshop a few days after the party. "Oh, Al. Great timing. Come take a look, I think I am really close." As the sorceress approached, Seth suddenly started a deep chant, accompanied by the play of his lyre. A shiver ran down her spine as she became restless. On the ground, a circular spell array lit up and glowing runes started engraving on the soul floating above it. However, after several minutes the lights started flickering as the ground heated up. The molten stone floor broke apart the array and the experiment failed in a shockwave of energy and smoke. "Ah, damn! It failed again." Alzalsar looked at him in shock. When had this numbskull improved this much? "Let me take a look." Listening to his theories and explanations, the sorceress could only nod. The idea of tickling a blueprint out of the soul was a creative approach she would not have thought of. It did not necessarily mean that it would recreate the body that the soul possessed when it was alive, but it would create the most fitting body. "Show me how you draw the spell array." Seth took about 10 minutes to draw the improved magic circle with arcane chalk. The moment he stood up and proudly looked down at his work, he got a slap to the back of his head from Al. Now, she knew the reason why it did not work, and it was aggravating. The circle and theories were correct. The reason was, "It's your shitty handwriting, you dimwit. No wonder the array failed with the kind of sloppy mess you scribble on the ground." "What? That can't be true." "But it is. Look, you made several mistakes," she said before pointing out at over 10 places in the complicated sketch on the ground. "Listen, I don't have the time to give to a refresher on spell array writing. The reason I came was to get my dragon bane." "The ring? Why?" "Because it's mine. Isn't that enough reason? I already lent it to you for such a long time. I think you can do something equally powerful yourself now." "But..." "No buts, stop looking at me like that." "No, no," I said. The sorceress could not withstand the secret technique Seth had learned from Finn, puppy eyes. "How about this? I will enchant you a replacement. And help me adapt it later." Seth suddenly increased the price. "Okay. Okay." Seth had lost a powerful anti-dragon ring, but he gained the promise to get a replacement and help for later. Someone else may mourn the loss, but it was worth it for Seth. It saved him a lot of time. Fixing his handwriting was easy if he used the system guidance again and again. But even if this array would now work, he would have to adapt it to Al's and his own golem technology. It would go a lot faster with her help. All that was left was refining the technology using refined souls. "Pip, could you guys come over for a moment? I want to show you something." They were just helping Otto tend to the herbs and plants when Seth suddenly appeared in the subterranean herb garden. This was the foundation for Mina's Mars potion business. The plants, the smell, the work here reminded Pip and the others a lot of their happy times with Karina, and it was their favorite place in all of the tower. The pharmacist Otto was also very nice to them. Pip never had a grandfather, but Otto was the closest to it. Of course, Tower Master, Pip answered politely. Come on, I told you to keep calling me Seth. Please excuse me, Tower Master. Having seen Minasmar and the kind of power and status Seth had, Pip felt awkward to act as casual with him, as she had on the journey. Fine. Come with him, I wish to show you something, he told the children with a mysterious smile. They followed the Tower Master through the herb gardens all the way to a door they had never seen. It wasn't that they had never been here before. This was new. When had this door appeared here? The two great door wings swung open as he got closer. Behind the doors was an expansive cave. No, not a cave, a wide hall with a high ceiling and ground made of fertile soil. The wet earthy smell filled their noses as they followed Seth in. You stay here and watch, he said with a chuckle before going to the middle of the room. Then he planted two spheres in the soil and sat down with crossed legs. As they watched him, a silent whisper entered their ears. Was the Tower Master singing? But it did not sound like music. As Pip listened, memories of the forest started surfacing. The rustle of the leaves and creaking of wood as the trees swung in the wind. The cool, humid air smelling of earth and vegetation. Small dots started lighting up on the ceiling, looking like a sea of stars. With his lips still moving, the Tower Master stood and slowly backed off from the center of the room. Walking backward, he came closer to them. As he walked, the tune changed. Pip remembered the few good times in her life. Snippets of spending time with her parents, playing with the others in Karina's grove, the moment Karina accepted her as a disciple. In the center of the room, a small offshoot became visible. They had just spotted the small plant when it rapidly started growing. The stars on the ceilings became brighter and brighter as the sprout became a small tree. Its trunk grew thicker, and the crown grew wider and ever closer to the ceiling. The ceiling that had felt as far away as the night sky was covered by the wide crown of the tree. They knew this tree. It was a lot smaller, but the presence they felt was the same. A bundle of roots suddenly emerged from the ground. Twisting, tightening, turning, it took a humanoid shape, and before their widened eyes a sleeping beauty took shape. She peacefully laid between the massive roots of the tree. She looked just like Karina. Hot tears streamed from her eyes, but she did not dare to run to her while the Tower Master was still singing. A big warm hand then grasped her shoulder and she looked up. Let's go to her, Seth said, smiling down at her. His words had just ended when everyone sprinted to the Dryad's side. Master! Master Karina! Everyone hugged the sleeping Dryad and called out her name. What is? Are you, Pip? Livina? Paul? Master Karina was really back. The children's faces were covered in tears and snot as they looked up at the waking tree spirit. Chapter 400. Back to business? Wow, look at him. Did you expect he would accomplish something like that? The blonde youth asked his uncle. Not this quickly. But it was probably inevitable after Seth intervened. Hades sighed tiredly, looking at his foster champion randomly reviving people. I'm glad he met that sorceress. This method is a lot better than what the other guy did. Hephaestus commented. Don't remind me of that. He was so promising, but he quickly lost himself in his zeal. Hades lamented. I'm glad Seth is on the less ambitious side. It makes watching him more interesting. Kakik, he's really petty. Zarkin is really unlucky. Hermes said, remembering Seth creating the Zarkist radar. The Herald of Olympus had been recently released from the system god's shadow realm. It's simply the consequence of his own actions, Hades said offhandedly. Right, who told him to wantonly wreck the new world? He would naturally garner animosity, the blacksmith god agreed. Don't you think the others would be interested in him, too? What are you saying? We are already sharing him among 3 people. How many more do you want to bring in? That was not what I meant. Doesn't he have that trait? Wouldn't it be interesting if... Not one more word. Hephaestus looked around nervously. Oh, but I want to listen some more. Go on, Hermes the system god said, who had appeared in the seat behind them. The blonde youth looked back and forth between his brother and the system god. Hades acted like it did not faze him. Seeing his uncle not act and weighing between his brother's wrath and the system god's discontent, the decision was easy. If the other uncles, aunts, brothers, and sisters gave him their blessing, I bet he could end up with a lot of fun stuff. You know, with all myths of Olympus affecting his items, instead of just those of you two. Hephaestus groaned. Ho ho, so there was a back door like that. The system god mused. Once the time came and more gods intervened with Earth, there would naturally be more gods of Olympus, and if Seth managed to garner their interest, he would get more access to their myths. It was a very subtle way to influence his way at a later point in time. He fixated the blacksmith god, who was trying to look innocent. I will leave it at a warning since it is not technically overstepping your bounds, the system god judged leniently. He was also looking forward to it, once those dicks started messing with Seth. Seth had already had a long conversation with Karina after he had refined the caring soul and managed to restore its ego. This aura. Was it you that brought the fire, that burned away the darkness? She was missing a lot of memories, but the clearest were those just before her death. She had felt the corruption encroach on her mind, taking control of her body and very being. Her body, her tree, the very floor below her feet had been steeped in a darkness. The inky blackness wanted only one thing. To expand, to conquer. More. More, it had screamed in her mind and compelled her to move and help spreading its corruption. She struggled to resist and bind herself. No longer in control of herself, she could only hope for her children to run fast enough, to escape this terrible fate. To escape before she was forced to hunt them with her own hands. When the pale flame came, it was salvation, not death. Pip had told Seth about their time with Karina. It would be a lie to say that he felt no remorse for not using it for a piece of equipment. However, listening to Pip reminded him of his own sorrow after he lost his parents. Of course, it could not be compared. He had been in a much better position after he lost them. Still, it was what made him decide to try this. Listening to Karina, whose only concern was her children, even after dying and regaining her senses, had assured him that he did the right thing. One of the reasons he started with Karina and the hanging tree, was that they were the simplest. The structure and instincts of a tree were a lot simpler than that of a being of flesh and blood. Also, giving birth to a dryad was a natural thing for a great tree. He had used their connection as a soul set, to revive the hanging tree and Karina in one go. Pip, I will leave Karina in your care. She has lost a lot of memories. You can help her regain some, but most importantly, to make new ones. Okay. Yes, the girl said, her eyes red from crying. Seeing her reunite with her foster mom warmed Seth's heart. Then he looked up at the tree. Its looming figure was much smaller than the one Seth knew, but the giant canopy and the curtain of vines were the same. Before, Seth thought to have some misgivings about growing a hanging tree in his home base. But when he looked at it now, he felt no negative emotions. It was a simple twist in logic. This was not an enemy, he had grown this tree. This was his tree. He had worked hard to make it. He had spent time, money, and almost 50 magic crystals on growing it. He could dislike all other trees, but not his own baby. Seth gave the children and their mother some privacy in their reunion and returned to the workshop. He would have liked to take a break for today, but everyone else was working. She stretched a little before he sat down to make a ring from wagram. He felt really calm since he succeeded with such a big task. He had been working on it very seriously. Making the ring now, was almost like a break. This would be the replacement for Dragon Bane, Al had taken with her. Because she promised to enchant it, he only had to make the body. It had been a while since he could Kami make a ring. Since he did not plan how to put in the enchantments, he could make it to his liking. He had seen the depiction of a phoenix in the book from Master Mountain. Al said it was called a vermilion bird. Seth made a tail feather of this bird from wagram and turned it into a ring. Seth had to smile about the irony. A ring shaped like the tail feather of a firebird to buff his earth affinity and magic. The whole time he hummed a tune praising the primordial beast of earth behemoth. Feather of the beast. Epic. Durability, 1200. 1 plus 20% earth affinity. 2 plus 35% to the effect of all earth attribute magic. 3 plus 45% additional curse damage to earth attribute skills. 4 plus 15% health regeneration when standing on firm ground. A simple yet elegant ring by the hands of craftsman Smith. Blessed by a primordial existence, pleased with the purity of the item. Seth was slightly surprised with the additional effects. He had not expected the ballad for Behemoth to be his good. This should be a good base for Al's enchantment, he said and nodded to himself. Satisfied with his day's work, he decided to check on the others. He wound Whedon happily working on the details for a leather armor. How's it going, Whedon? Seth? You already came out of the workshop. Yeah, I'm done for today. How about you? I still need to finish the details for this one. Do you want to go and drink afterward? Sure, should we get home, too? Don't bother. He can't come. Why? His wife is close to giving birth. Lately, he immediately runs home to spend time with her. Well, then it's just the two of us. Do you know how Nico is doing? The wimpy tailor? I've heard he's getting close to leave 50. That's good to hear. Seth helped Whedon finish the armor set and they went off to Delta for a drink. Minas Mar had a good assortment of alcohol, but it did not beat a high-class bar. The place they visited was called the Flux, a nightclub Mina had introduced him to. The current owner had done his best to collect not just good drinks from Earth, but also from the Empire and its provinces. The assortment was overwhelming, and it was fun to test new drinks from all kinds of places. It was just a shame that most teams were currently in the dungeons, so he could invite Mina and the others. May I sit here? A man asked. He had black hair and black eyes. He was not overly tall, but not short either. He had a handsome heroic face that made anyone who looked at it like him. No. Why not? Asked surprised, as if he was sure that Seth would allow it.